Chapter 1: The White Silence. The Mi-8 helicopter's rotors thrashed the frigid air, a discordant mechanical pulse against the vast, unending white of the Siberian taiga. Inside, the machine vibrated, a deep thrum that Lena Petrova registered more as a pressure in her bones than a sound. Her gloved hands rested on the cold steel of her rifle. Outside the thick, double-paned window, snow-choked pines blurred into a monotonous green-gray smear. They had flown over this unchanging landscape for hours. Dr. Aris Thorne, expedition leader and a man whose ambition Lena found vaguely unsettling, gestured towards the front. His voice, amplified by the headset, crackled. Approaching the designated coordinates. Visibility is dropping. Standard Siberian welcome. Zara Al-Jamil, the mission's linguist and historian, peered through her own window, her breath misting the cold surface. She pushed a strand of dark hair from her forehead, her expression a mixture of academic intensity and a flicker of something less certain. Any visual on surface structures. The archival schematics suggested a disguised primary access point. Ben Carter, the tech specialist, hunched over a ruggedized laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard despite thick gloves. Satellite imagery showed anomalies consistent with ventilation shafts and a possible blast door, but it's all under several meters of snowpack now. Thermal scans are getting noisy. Lots of interference from the permafrost itself. Lena said nothing. Her focus remained outward, scanning the terrain. Years in Spetsnaz had taught her the value of observation, the silent language of a hostile environment. This place screamed hostility. The cold was a living entity here, seeping through the helicopter's insulation, a constant pressure. The helicopter banked, its descent beginning. The rhythmic slap of the rotors altered pitch. Below, the trees thinned, revealing a vast, undulating plain of white, punctuated by wind-sculpted snowdrifts. Thorne spoke again. Landing zone is approximately 1 click south of the primary anomaly. Misha, you confirm the ground conditions. Mikhail Volkov, the geologist, a man whose face seemed carved from the Siberian rock itself, nodded slowly. Ground is stable, permafrost deep. Snow cover will be difficult. Expect deep drifts. His Russian was thick, a low rumble. The helicopter settled with a final hydraulic sigh, snow billowing up around it like a sudden storm. The engine whine decreased, rotors slowing. Lena was the first to her feet, her movements economical, practiced. She unlatched the heavy side door. A blast of air, unimaginably cold, tore into the cabin, carrying with it fine, stinging ice particles. It bit at any exposed skin, a predatory sharpness. "Riley, with me," Lena commanded, her voice low and clear, cutting through the residual engine noise. Sergeant Rex Riley, a broad-shouldered American ex-Marine, hefted his own rifle and nodded, his face impassive. They stepped out onto the snow. It came up to their knees, powder-fine and treacherous. The silence after the constant noise of the helicopter was profound. It pressed in, a physical weight. The only sounds were the crunch of their boots, the whisper of the wind across the endless white, and the distant, fatting thrum of the Mi-8 as it began its ascent, leaving them utterly alone. Zara emerged next, blinking against the stark brightness, pulling her fur-lined hood tighter. Dr. Vance, the virologist, followed, her movements precise, already scanning their immediate surroundings with a trained eye. Jian Li, the cryogenics expert, looked small and out of place against the immense desolation. Thorne was last, a grin set to his jaw as he surveyed the scene. Carter established a temporary comms link with the pilot. Confirmation of his return to base, Thorne ordered. Lena, Misha, find us a path to that anomaly. We make camp near the access point if we can find it before dark. Darkness came early in these latitudes and swiftly. Lena nodded. Misha. She gestured for the geologist to take the lead. Volkov produced a pair of wide snowshoes from his pack, strapping them on with practiced ease. The others began to do the same, a clumsy process for some in the biting cold. The air was thin, burning the lungs. Every breath was visible, a plume of white vapor instantly snatched away by the wind. The silence persisted, broken only by their own efforts. No birds called. No animals rustled in the undergrowth. There was no undergrowth, only the endless, frozen expanse. Zara trudged beside Lena, her snowshoes sinking less than Lena's heavy boots. The archives called it abject Chernobog, Zara said, her voice slightly muffled by her scarf. Named after the old Slavic deity, the Dark One, god of misfortune. Lena grunted, a noncommittal sound. She was more concerned with the terrain. The ground sloped gently upwards. The snow hid pitfalls, depressions, rocks. Misha probed ahead with a long pole, his progress slow but steady. Riznikov's team. They were here for years, Zara continued, a persistent academic current in her tone. Top Soviet biochemists, virologists. The project was designated ultra-classified. Even the name Chernobog was buried deep. Most records referred to it simply as Sector 7. Less talking, more watching, Lena advised, her eyes scanning the horizon, the tree line in the distance, the way the snow lay in unnatural patterns across certain areas. The wind was picking up, swirling fine snow into their faces. They walked for what felt like an eternity, the cold intensifying its assault. Fingers grew numb despite the gloves. Faces ached. Thorne called occasional halts, allowing the team to catch their breath to check equipment. During one such stop, Ben Carter swore, his voice thin against the wind. Comms are spotty, getting a lot of interference. Pilot confirmed departure, but the signal is degrading fast. Something out here is messing with the frequencies. He gestured vaguely towards the north, the direction Misha was leading them. Geomagnetic anomaly, Thorne asked, frowning. Could be, Carter said, though he sounded unconvinced. Or something else. Misha suddenly stopped, pointing with his pole. There. Through the swirling snow, Lena could discern a subtle change in the landscape. A long, low mound, almost perfectly straight, too regular to be natural. It was almost completely buried, but its outline was just visible beneath the white shroud. It stretched for several hundred meters. That matches the dimensions of the primary access corridor roof, Zara said, consulting a data slate she pulled from her parka. The screen flickered erratically in the cold. The main blast doors should be at the western terminus. As they drew closer, the sense of artificiality grew stronger. This was no natural hillock. This was built. Concrete, Lena guessed, buried deep. The wind howled a mournful song across its exposed sections, scouring away snow in some places, piling it deep in others. They reached the western end of the mound. Here, the snow was deeper, piled against what looked like a sheer, vertical drop, though it was hard to tell. Misha began to probe with his pole, thrusting it into the drift. It met resistance, then slid deeper, then stopped with a dull thud. Metal, Misha announced, big, thick. The blast doors, Thorne breathed, a hint of excitement in his voice. Carter, get your ground-penetrating radar configured. Let's see what we're dealing with. While Carter fumbled with his equipment, his exposed fingers quickly turning red, Lena and Riley began a perimeter sweep. The structure, what little they could divine of it, was immense. Cold emanated from the ground here, a deeper, more profound chill than the ambient air temperature. It was as if the earth itself were exhaling frozen breath. Zara moved to the edge of the drift, peering down where Misha had probed. She ran a gloved hand over a section of exposed, gray material that the wind had briefly uncovered. It wasn't concrete. It was pitted, discolored metal, almost black in places, slick with a thin veneer of ice. This isn't just a bunker, Zara murmured, almost to herself. This is a tomb. Lena heard her. She saw the way Zara touched the frozen metal, a strange reverence in the gesture. A shiver, unrelated to the cold, traced its way down Lena's spine. This place felt wrong, deeply wrong. The silence here wasn't empty, it was watchful. Carter finally got a signal. Okay, GPR is active, the doors. They are massive, reinforced steel several feet thick looks like. And there's a void beyond them, a big one, the initial entry chamber according to the plans. He paused, frowning at his screen. There's something else. A lot of structural interference around the frame. Can't tell if it's damage or something grown onto it. Grown. Thorne stepped closer to Carter's screen. Before Carter could answer, a low groan echoed from beneath the snow, a sound like tortured metal shifting under immense pressure. It was deep, resonant, and it seemed to vibrate up through the soles of their boots. Everyone froze. Riley's rifle was up, pointing towards the snowdrift covering the presumed doors. What was that? He hissed. The wind gusted, whipping snow into a frenzy, obscuring their vision for a moment. When it cleared, nothing seemed to have changed. The vast, white silence pressed back in, heavier than before. Lena scanned the area, her senses on high alert. Thermal signatures. Carter shook his head, his eyes wide. Nothing, still just noise. Whatever that was, it's as cold as the rest of this damned place. Thorne, after a moment of hesitation, took a deep breath. It's the structure settling. Extreme temperatures. It's an old facility. We expected this. He sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as the others. Zara was still staring at the spot where Misha had probed, where the groan had seemed to originate. Her face was pale. She slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook, an actual physical notebook, an anachronism in their high-tech assembly. She opened it, her fingers stiff with cold, and made a brief notation. Night is falling, Misha observed, his voice flat. The sun, a pale disk, was already touching the distant, jagged horizon, painting the underside of the clouds in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. The shadows were lengthening, turning the pristine white snow into a landscape of shifting blues and grays. "We need to find a way in or make a secure camp," Lena stated, her gaze fixed on the almost buried doors. The thought of spending a night exposed on this frozen plain, with that sound still echoing in her memory, was not appealing. The bunker, for all its implied menace, at least offered shelter from the relentless, killing wind. The groan came again, louder this time, more prolonged. It was followed by a distinct, sharp crack, like a colossal bone snapping. A plume of powdery snow erupted from the top of the drift directly above where the doors were presumed to be. Riley swore under his breath, "That ain't settling." Lena tightened her grip on her rifle. The white silence was no longer empty. Something was stirring beneath the ice and snow, something ancient, something that had been waiting. Chapter 2: The Frozen Threshold. The echoes of the sharp crack faded, absorbed by the immense, sound-dampening blanket of snow. Yet the vibration lingered in the ground, a faint tremor beneath their feet. Lena's gaze remained locked on the plume of snow that had erupted from the drift. It settled slowly, like disturbed dust in a long-sealed room. The wind, which had momentarily died down, picked up again, its mournful howl weaving through the growing dusk. "Carter, report." Thorne's voice was sharp, cutting through the sudden tension. His face, illuminated by the ghostly light of Carter's equipment, was taut. Ben Carter tapped frantically at his console, his breath clouding around his head. "Structural integrity around the doorframe is fluctuating. I'm getting weird energy readings. Not radiation, something else. Low frequency, very low." He shook his head, his expression a mix of confusion and fear. "It's like the whole damn thing just sighed." Zara Al-Jamal took a hesitant step closer to the disturbed snowdrift, her data slate clutched in her hand. The schematics mentioned an external pressure release system for the primary doors, but it was manually operated from within. This is something else. Mikhail Volkov, ever the pragmatist, drove his probing pole deep into the snow near the disturbance. It struck something solid much sooner than before. He grunted. "Snow has shifted. Something underneath pushed it up." "We need to get those doors open," Thorne declared, his earlier unease replaced by a renewed sense of urgency. "Vance Lee, prepare for potential atmospheric contamination upon entry. Standard Level 4 protocols. Riley, you and I will assist Misha in clearing some of this snow. Lena, cover us. Carter, keep those sensors active. I want to know if so much as a rat breathes in there." Lena didn't like it. The sounds, the shifting snow, it felt less like mechanical failure and more like something awakening. She moved to a slightly elevated position on a nearby snowdrift, her rifle sweeping the area in slow, methodical arcs. The encroaching darkness was making observation difficult. The landscape was losing its definition, merging into a palette of deep blues and purples. The only points of reference were the pale ovals of her team members' faces and the faint glow from Carter's equipment. Misha, Thorne, and Riley began to dig, using collapsible shovels from their packs. The work was brutal. The snow was compacted in places, powdery in others, and the sheer volume was immense. Each shovelful seemed to make little difference. The cold was relentless, sapping their strength, numbing their extremities. Zara stood near Carter, watching his screens. The journal entries I reviewed. Reznikov mentioned active containment measures for the Chernobog agent. Not just cryogenics, he hinted at something. Biological, integrated systems. Carter glanced up, his eyes wide. Biological, like the bunker itself is alive. Not exactly alive, Zara corrected, though her voice lacked conviction. More like a designed ecosystem meant to contain the primary agent. He called the auxiliary biological components the gardeners or the custodians. It was all very vague, almost poetic in a disturbing way. He was losing his coherence towards the end of those early logs. Lena listened, her attention divided between their conversation and the vast, silent expanse around them. Custodians. The word sent another chill down her spine, colder than the wind. After nearly an hour of backbreaking labor, the upper edge of a massive, dark metal door began to emerge from the snow. It was immense, at least 5 meters high, and its surface was not smooth. It was scarred, pitted, and in places, covered with what looked like frozen metallic growths, like barnacles of black ice. "That's what I was seeing on the GPR," Carter exclaimed, pointing at the strange accretions. "It's not corrosion, it looks organic, but metallic." Dr. Vance, the virologist, approached cautiously, her flashlight beam dancing over the exposed section of the door. "Fascinating. Some kind of extremophile, a metallo-organic compound. I've never seen anything like it." She reached out a gloved hand as if to touch it. "Vance, no." Thorne's voice was sharp. "Nothing gets touched until we have a full atmospheric and bioscan of the interior." Vance withdrew her hand, though her gaze remained fixed on the strange growths. The digging continued. The sheer scale of the doors became apparent. They were colossal, designed to withstand unimaginable forces. As more of their surface was revealed, strange symbols became visible, etched deep into the metal, partially obscured by the icy accretions. They were not Russian. They were not any known language Zara could immediately identify. They were angular, complex, and somehow unsettling to look upon. "Those markings," Zara breathed, stepping closer, her data slate now active, its camera trying to capture the symbols. "They're not in any of the archival data. They look older, much older than the bunker's construction period." Lena frowned. This complicated things. A Soviet black site was one thing. A Soviet black site built on or around something ancient and unknown was another entirely. Finally, after what felt like an age, a significant portion of the main doors was exposed. A massive, wheel-like mechanism was set into the center of the right-hand door, presumably the manual override. It was coated in the same black, icy material. "All right," Thorne said, panting, wiping ice from his eyebrows. "Misha, Riley, try the wheel slowly." The two men, both powerful, positioned themselves on either side of the massive wheel. They strained. The metal groaned in protest, a deep, tortured sound that echoed the earlier noises. The wheel didn't budge. "It's frozen solid," Riley grunted, stepping back, his breath plumbing. or something is holding it. Carter spoke up from his station. The internal locking mechanisms are still engaged, according to the schematics. There should be a control panel to the right of the doors for external access, if it still has power. They cleared more snow. Sure enough, set into the concrete abutment beside the doors was a heavily armored panel. It was coated in ice. Jian Li, the cryogenics expert, stepped forward with a de-icing tool, a small, handheld device that emitted a focused beam of heat. Carefully, she began to melt the ice from the panel. Underneath, the steel was relatively intact. A heavy cover plate was secured by several large bolts. Riley produced a multi-tool and began to work on them. The bolts were stiff, resisting every turn, but slowly, one by one, they gave way with sharp cracks. With the last bolt removed, Riley pulled the cover plate free. It came away with a screech of protesting metal. Behind it was a recess containing a surprisingly simple interface. A heavy lever, currently in the locked position, and a single, large, red button protected by a safety cover. That's it, Ben Carter sounded incredulous. The primary external access to a top-secret bioweapons facility is a lever and a button. Soviet engineering, Misha rumbled. Robust, simple, supposedly foolproof. Thorne examined the panel. The lever should disengage the physical locks. The button, that must activate the hydraulic system for the doors themselves, assuming anything in there still works after 60 years in the ice. He looked at Jian Li. Can you assess if there's any power trace to this panel? Jian Li produced a sensor and carefully scanned the panel and the surrounding conduit. There is a residual energy signature, very faint. It's not coming from the bunker's main power grid according to the schematics I have. It's localized, almost like a battery, but organic, she frowned, tapping her sensor. That can't be right. Organic battery, Zara repeated, looking intrigued. Reznikov wrote about bioelectric systems in his later, more fragmented notes. He was trying to create a self-sustaining power source for the containment field, independent of the main grid. Forget the power source, just tell me if it's enough to work, Thorne pressed. Jian Li hesitated. Theoretically, if this system is designed for low-power activation and uses some kind of charge capacitor, it might be enough for one cycle. Maybe. Thorne nodded. All right, Lena maintained full alert. Everyone else stepped back from the doors. He gripped the heavy lever. Here we go. With a grunt of effort, Thorne threw his weight against the lever. There was a moment of resistance, then a series of deep, resonant clunks echoed from within the doors, like giant tumblers falling into place. The sound was surprisingly loud in the frozen silence. Locks disengaged, Thorne announced, a grim satisfaction in his tone. He flipped up the safety cover on the red button. His gloved finger hovered over it. Dr. Vance, are your atmospheric sensors ready? Vance held up a handheld device. Ready. Recording baseline atmospheric composition now. Thorne took a deep breath. Opening the gates of hell, perhaps. He pressed the button. For a long moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched, taut and expectant. Lena felt the hairs on the back of her neck prickle. Carter was muttering something, probably a prayer. Then a low hum began, almost too low to hear, more of a vibration felt through the ground. It grew steadily in intensity. A faint, blue light flickered from the seams of the colossal doors. The icy accretions on their surface seemed to glow with a faint, internal luminescence. The hum became a groan, the groan of immense mechanisms stirring from a long slumber. Slowly, with agonizing slowness, the massive doors began to part, not by sliding but by swinging outwards ponderously like the gates of some ancient, forgotten citadel. A gust of air billowed from the opening, carrying with it a smell that Lena had never encountered before. It was cold, impossibly cold, colder than the Siberian air, and it was laden with the scent of ozone, damp earth, and something else. Something faintly metallic and vaguely organic, like decaying autumn leaves mixed with rust. Dr. Vance's atmospheric sensor began to chirp erratically. Anomalous particulate readings, high concentration of unknown spores, methane, ammonia, and traces of, I don't know what this is, nothing matching known terrestrial compounds. Her voice was tight with alarm. The gap between the doors widened, revealing an impenetrable darkness beyond. It was a blackness that seemed to swallow the faint light from their headlamps. Lena felt a primal urge to step back, to put distance between herself and that yawning abyss. The bunker didn't just feel cold, it felt hungry. The doors reached their fully open position with a final, shuddering thud that vibrated through the rock. The blue light from their seams faded, the hum died down. Silence returned, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the silence of an open tomb. "All right," Thorne said, his voice a little shaky despite his attempt at control. "Lights on. Let's see what we've woken up." He advanced towards the threshold, his powerful flashlight beam cutting into the darkness. The others followed, a mixture of trepidation and scientific curiosity on their faces. Lena moved with them, her rifle ready, every sense straining. The air from the bunker was heavy, stagnant. As she crossed the threshold, stepping from the frozen Siberian snow onto the equally frozen metal floor of the bunker's entrance chamber, she felt a distinct drop in temperature and something else. A palpable sense of ancientness, of immense, dormant power. The entrance chamber was vast, cavernous. Their flashlight beams danced across walls of pitted dark metal, disappearing into a darkness so profound it seemed to have substance. Icicles, thick as a man's arm and unnaturally sharp, hung from the ceiling, gleaming like fangs in their lights. Strange, web-like formations of the black, icy material they'd seen on the door's coated sections of the walls and floor, intricate and disturbingly beautiful. And then Zara gasped, her flashlight beam fixed on the far wall. Gods! Etched into the metal of the wall, towering over them, was a symbol. It was a grotesque, intricate carving, many meters high. It depicted a vaguely humanoid figure, but with multiple, spidery limbs, a horned head, and eyes that seemed to swallow the light. It was the same style as the markings on the outer doors, but rendered in terrifying detail. "Chernobog," Zara whispered, her voice filled with awe and dread. "That's him, that's the dark god." Beneath the carving, half buried in a drift of what looked like frozen black dust, lay a shape. It was roughly human-sized, encased in the same dark crystalline substance that coated the walls. Lena approached cautiously, her light focused on the shape. It was a body, or what was left of one. Frozen solid, contorted in a silent scream, its features obscured by the black, icy shroud. It wore the tattered remnants of a Soviet-era uniform. One of its hands, skeletal and encased in ice, clutched a small, leather-bound object to its chest. Zara slowly reached out, her breath misting heavily in the frigid air of the bunker. With extreme care, her gloved fingers brushed away some of the icy dust from the object. It was a journal. Chapter 3: Whispers from the Ice. The silence in the vast entrance chamber was broken only by the ragged breathing of the team members and the insistent, worried chirping of Dr. Vance's atmospheric sensor. Lena's flashlight beam remained fixed on the frozen figure, specifically on the leather-bound journal clutched in its icy grip. The implications of its presence here at the very threshold of Chernobog were chilling. This was not some random casualty. This was a message. Zara al-Jamil knelt beside the frozen form, her expression a complex mixture of scholarly fascination and profound unease. Her gloved fingers, trembling slightly, hovered over the journal. It's preserved, almost perfectly by the look of it. "Don't touch anything yet, Zara," Thorne cautioned, his voice tight. He directed his own powerful beam onto the figure. "Vance, what are your readings on this?" "Individual." Dr. Ilara Vance moved closer, her sensor held out like a warding talisman. Minimal biological activity, as expected. Extreme cellular degradation due to cryostasis, but the encasing material seems to have acted as a preservative of sorts. It's not just ice. It's infused with metallic particulates and those unknown organic compounds, like a natural, horrifying embalming. "The custodians Riznikov mentioned," Carter muttered, his voice barely a whisper. He kept glancing nervously at the colossal, disturbing carving of Chernobog that dominated the far wall. Or their handiwork. Lena kept her rifle pointed towards the deeper darkness of the bunker, her ears straining for any sound beyond their own. The air here was thick, heavy, carrying that strange, multi-layered scent of decay, metal, and ozone. It felt like breathing in the dust of ages. "The journal," Zara said, her gaze still fixed on the small book. "If it's what I think it is, it could be invaluable. It might even be Riznikov's." Thorne considered this. The potential for information was undeniable. "All right, Riley, see if you can free it. Gently, we don't want to damage it or disturb our friend here more than necessary." Sergeant Riley, his face a mask of grim determination, knelt opposite Zara. He examined the frozen hand clutching the journal. The fingers were locked tight, encased in the black, crystalline ice. He produced a fine tool from his kit, a pick designed for delicate work. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to chip away at the ice around the journal. Each tap of the tool echoed unnaturally in the vast chamber. The process was agonizingly slow. The ice was incredibly hard, more like stone than frozen water. As Riley worked, tiny fragments of the black material flaked off, revealing glimpses of the journal's leather cover. It was dark, worn, and bore no markings. Mikhail Volkov, the geologist, ran his gloved hand along a section of the wall nearby, his flashlight beam playing over the strange, web-like formations of black ice. This bunker, it feels older than its construction. The rock itself here is different, colder. He scraped at one of the icy webs with a geological pick. It came away with a strange, rubbery resistance, not shattering like normal ice. And this material, it's not a natural formation. Jian Li, the cryogenics expert, was examining the massive inner doors, which mirrored the design of the outer ones, complete with another huge frozen wheel. The temperature differential is extreme. It's at least 20 degrees colder inside this chamber than it was outside. The cryosystems, or whatever maintains this state, must be immense. Or it's not artificial, Zara murmured, watching Riley's progress. What if the cold isn't entirely manufactured? What if the bunker was built here because of an existing anomaly? Lena swept her light across the ceiling. The icicles hanging there were monstrous, many of them reaching almost to the floor, their tips needle-sharp. They didn't drip. The air was too cold, too dry. They just hung there, silent, menacing. After what seemed like an eternity, Riley grunted. Almost. Got it. With a final, careful pry, the journal came free from the frozen corpse's grip. It left a perfect impression in the ice-encased hand. Riley held it out, handling it as if it were a live explosive. Zara took it with reverence, her breath misting. She turned it over in her hands. The leather was stiff with cold but remarkably intact. She carefully opened the cover. The pages within were brittle, yellowed, and filled with dense, spidery handwriting. Russian. It is a journal, Zara breathed, her eyes scanning the first few lines. The script. It's consistent with the period. This could be it. This could be Patient Zero's testimony. A wave of anticipation, mixed with dread, passed through the group. This was what they had come for, in a sense. The truth behind Chernobog, locked away in these frozen pages. "Bring it over here," Thorne said, gesturing to a relatively clear patch of floor near Carter's equipment. Carter, set up a portable light. Zara, let's see what our silent friend wanted to tell us. They gathered around as Zara carefully placed the journal under the bright glare of the portable LED lamp. The pages were stiff, and she handled them with extreme care, terrified they might crumble to dust. The ink was faded but legible. The first entry was dated, decades ago. The handwriting is agitated, Zara observed, tracing a line with her finger. Even from the beginning, he mentions Project Chernobog by name. He talks about the primary agent and the unique properties of the deep permafrost strata at this location. She began to translate, her voice low and steady, a stark contrast to the chilling words she was uttering. October 17th. We have breached the primary geode. The cold is alive, not like the surface cold. This is ancient, a stillness from before time. Professor Volkovsky believes the Chernobog agent is not merely preserved by it but symbiotic with it. He theorizes the agent itself generates this unnatural cold, a byproduct of its dormant state. Lena exchanged a glance with Misha. Volkovsky, a famous Soviet geophysicist who had disappeared in the late 50s, so he had been part of this. Zara continued, her voice dropping even lower. October 23rd. Initial attempts to extract a sample of the core agent have problematic. The containment drills shatter. The ice around the geode reforms almost instantly. It resists, actively. Reznikov is frustrated. He speaks of needing a more persuasive method. A shiver went through the group. Persuasive method. The words hung in the frigid air. The geode, Misha Volkov muttered. The central containment. This explains the localized energy readings Giant was getting for the door panel. The organic battery. It's not a battery. It's the agent itself or something directly connected to it. Zara turned a page, her breath catching. November 5th. Success. Reznikov utilized sonic resonance. The geode opened like a flower of black crystal. Inside, the core agent is not what we expected. It is not a microbe, not a virus as we understand it. It is beautiful, a pulsating dark light. It whispers. I swear I can hear it whispering in my mind. The others deny it. They say it is the pressure, the isolation. Whispers, Carter echoed, his face pale. He nervously touched the side of his headset. I've been hearing static on frequencies that should be dead. Lena's eyes narrowed. She hadn't heard whispers, but she had felt that oppressive, watchful silence. Was it her imagination, or was the bunker subtly influencing them already? Zara's fingers trembled as she turned another page. The handwriting was becoming more erratic, the lines slanted, the words crowded. November 12th. The first animal trials, horrific, unspeakable. The agent does not kill, it remakes the flesh, the bone, it twists, but the eyes remain aware. Reznikov calls it accelerated adaptive mutation. I call it damnation. He has ordered us to begin work on the custodian strains, modified versions of the agent designed to protect the primary core and maintain the facility should external power fail. He wants guardians, monsters. Dr. Vance looked physically ill. Guardians. So the stories of mutated creatures were true. The journal entries grew shorter, more frantic. Dates were missing. Cold, so cold. The whispers are louder now, they promise. Power, understanding. Reznikov listens to them, he smiles, his eyes. There is a light in his eyes now, a dark light. Something is wrong with Boris. His skin. It looks like the ice on the walls. He screams about the cold in his bones. They took him to the med bay. He didn't come back. The alarms, all the alarms, the custodian strains, they are loose, uncontrolled. They are not guarding, they are hunting. We sealed Sector 4. God forgive us, we sealed them in with them. Reznikov, he is changing. He locked himself in the primary lab with the geode. He says he is communing. The door is frozen shut from the inside. The final entry was barely legible, a desperate scrawl across the page. It's in me, the cold, the whispers, I can feel it, twisting. I tried to reach the outer doors to warn anyone but the custodians. They are everywhere, this journal. It is all that is left of me. Of Anatoly, my name is Anatoly Reznikov. Remember me, remember. The price. The last words trailed off into an unreadable smear of ink, as if the writer's hand had failed him. Silence. A heavy, profound silence descended upon the group, broken only by the steady, ominous chirp of Vance's sensor. Zara closed the journal, her hands shaking. Anatoly Reznikov, she whispered. This is Patient Zero, the man who became the warden. She looked towards the frozen figure, then at the journal in her hands. He didn't just succumb, he tried to warn us. Thorne was pale, his usual confident demeanor shaken. So the Guardians are real, the Chernobog agent. It's not just a weapon, it's some kind of sentient force. And Reznikov, its first human host, is presumably still in there, Lena said, her voice flat, gesturing with her rifle towards the darkness beyond the entrance chamber. With his custodians. Carter suddenly gasped, pointing a trembling finger at his main monitoring screen. Guys, I'm picking up movement, deep inside, multiple contacts, and they're coming this way. On the screen, several faint blips of light had appeared, moving slowly but purposefully from the deeper sectors of the bunker towards their position in the entrance chamber. The distant, almost inaudible sound that Lena had registered earlier sharpened. A faint, rhythmic skittering, getting closer. Chapter 4: The Skittering Dark. The blips on Carter's screen pulsed, a slow, predatory rhythm. Each flicker seemed to coincide with the faint, rhythmic skittering sound that was now undeniably growing louder, echoing from the Stygian depths of the bunker complex. Lena felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the heightened awareness that preceded combat. Her grip on her rifle was sure, her stance balanced. How many? Thorne's voice was low, urgent, all traces of academic detachment gone. At least 5. No, 6 distinct signals, Carter replied, his eyes glued to the screen. His fingers flew across his keyboard trying to get a clearer reading. They're not moving fast, but they're steady. And the signals are strange. They don't have the heat signature of anything warm-blooded. They're cold, like the rest of this place, but distinct from the background. The custodians, Zara breathed, her face ashen. She clutched Riznikov's journal to her chest as if it were a shield. They're active. Misha Volkov had already moved to one side of the massive open doorway, his own weapon, a heavy-caliber hunting rifle more suited to Siberian bears, held at the ready. Riley mirrored him on the other side, creating a crossfire position. Their movements were economical, born of experience. Dr. Vance, Dr. Lee, Thorne ordered, stay behind Carter's station. If this turns ugly, that equipment is our only lifeline to the outside world. He drew his own sidearm, a heavy pistol, its metallic click loud in the tense silence. The skittering sound was closer now, accompanied by a faint, dry rustling, like dead leaves blown across a frozen pond. It seemed to be coming from multiple directions within the darkness ahead, echoing and distorting in the vast, unseen corridors. Lena focused on the primary entryway leading deeper into the bunker. It was a yawning black rectangle, and her flashlight beam barely penetrated its oppressive gloom. The source of the sounds was still hidden within that darkness. She could smell it now, stronger than before, that cloying mix of ozone, decay, and something else, something acrid and unpleasantly animalistic. "Can you get a visual, Carter?" Lena asked, her voice calm, cutting through the rising tension. "Any cameras still active on your schematics in that sector?" Carter shook his head, his face illuminated by the eerie green glow of his monitors. "Negative. All internal surveillance systems are offline. Most went dark during the initial incident, according to Riznikov's journal. What didn't fail then has likely corroded or frozen solid decades ago. He pointed to a section of his screen. They're about 200 meters out, entering what the schematics label Primary Access Corridor B. The skittering grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't just one sound, Lena realized, but many, slightly out of sync, creating a disconcerting, multi-layered rhythm. It was the sound of claws on metal, dozens of them, hundreds perhaps. Light discipline, Lena ordered. Only essential beams. Don't give them easy targets. Most of the team extinguished their headlamps, plunging the cavernous entrance chamber into a deeper gloom, illuminated only by Lena's rifle-mounted light, Carter's screens, and the single work lamp shining on Riznikov's journal. The shadows danced, elongating, making the already monstrous icicles seem to writhe. A new sound joined the skittering, a soft, guttural clicking, almost like oversized insects communicating. It was deeply unsettling. Zara pressed herself against a cold, metal support beam, her eyes wide with fear. Even Thorne, despite his attempt at a commanding presence, kept glancing nervously into the black maw of the corridor. 50 meters, Carter announced, his voice strained. They're at the junction with this chamber. Silence. The skittering stopped. The clicking stopped. For a heart-stopping moment, the only sound was the frantic chirping of Vance's atmospheric sensor and their own ragged breathing. The sudden absence of noise was, if anything, more terrifying. Lena held her breath, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. Her light beam methodically swept the entrance to the corridor. Nothing, just impenetrable blackness. Then a flicker of movement at the very edge of her beam. Something pale, low to the ground. "Contact," Lena said, her voice flat. A creature emerged from the darkness. It was roughly dog-sized, but its anatomy was a nightmarish parody. Its body was gaunt, emaciated, covered in patchy, pale fur that seemed to absorb the light. Its limbs were too long, jointed at unnatural angles, ending in multi-fingered claws that scraped against the metal floor with that hideous skittering sound. Its head was elongated, eyeless, dominated by a gaping maw filled with needle-sharp teeth that clicked rapidly. It moved with a disturbing, insect-like gait, its body swaying from side to side. A pale crawler, just as Riznikov had indirectly described. Before anyone could react, another appeared beside it, and another, and then two more scuttling out from the oppressive darkness, their pale forms ghostly in the dim light. 5 of them. They fanned out, their eyeless heads turning as if sniffing the air, sensing their prey. "Hostiles confirmed," Riley growled, his rifle already sighted. "Permission to engage." "Hold your fire," Thorne snapped, his pistol wavering slightly. "Let's see what they do." One of the pale crawlers took a hesitant step forward, its claws clicking. It emitted a low hiss, a sound like escaping steam. The air around them grew colder, the scent of ozone intensifying. "They're repulsive," Dr. Vance whispered, her scientific detachment momentarily overwhelmed. The lead crawler took another step, then another, its eyeless face somehow focused on Carter's console, perhaps drawn by the faint electromagnetic field or the light. "That's close enough," Lena stated. She centered her rifle's laser sight on the creature's torso. "Thorn." Thorn hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. The lead crawler suddenly lunged, not with speed, but with a horrifying, deliberate agility, its elongated limbs propelling it forward with surprising reach. It wasn't aiming for Carter, but for the cables connecting his equipment to a portable generator. "Fire!" Lena yelled, squeezing the trigger. Her rifle barked a 3-round burst. The bullet struck the creature red center. It shrieked, an awful high-pitched sound that tore at their ears, and stumbled, a dark, viscous fluid, not quite blood, oozing from the wounds. It didn't go down. Riley's rifle roared, a single, heavy slug hitting the creature in what should have been its head. The impact threw it sideways, and it collapsed in a heap, its limbs twitching. The other 4 pale crawlers reacted instantly. They didn't scatter. They didn't retreat. They attacked. They surged forward, their skittering, clicking noises filling the chamber, their eyeless faces somehow conveying a terrifying, unified purpose. "Engage! Engage!" Thorne shouted, firing his pistol. One of his shots went wide, ricocheting off the metal wall with a scream. Another struck a crawler in the leg, causing it to stumble but not stop. Lena fired again, a controlled burst, dropping another of the creatures as it lunged towards Misha. Misha's heavy rifle boomed, and a crawler that was trying to flank them simply exploded in a shower of pale fur and dark ichor. One reached Riley, leaping with surprising speed. Riley met it with the butt of his rifle, a savage upward thrust that connected with its underside. The creature shrieked and recoiled, giving Riley the fraction of a second he needed to put a round into its chest. The last crawler, ignoring the fate of its packmates, charged directly at Lena. She sidestepped its initial lunge, the creature's claws scraping sparks from the floor where she had stood. It twisted, its eyeless face turning towards her, its maw snapping. She fired from the hip, a short, brutal burst. The creature crumpled, twitching, then lay still. Silence descended again, abrupt and shocking, broken only by the echo of the gunfire, the panting of the survivors, and the incessant, high-pitched chirping of Vance's sensor, which now seemed to be screaming a warning. The air was thick with the smell of cordite, ozone, and the foul, metallic scent of the creature's ichor. 4 pale crawlers lay dead or dying on the frozen metal floor. The 5th, the one Lena had hit first, was still twitching feebly, its shrieks now reduced to wet, gurgling whimpers. "Cease fire," Lena ordered, her rifle still trained on the wounded creature. "Everyone sound off." "Riley, clear," the Marine grunted, reloading his weapon. "Misha, clear." The geologist's voice was steady. "Thorn, clear." He sounded shaken. His pistol was still smoking. "Carter, okay? I'm okay." Ben's voice was high-pitched. Systems are still online." "Vance, Lee, we're unharmed," Dr. Vance reported, though her voice trembled. Lena approached the wounded crawler cautiously. It was trying to drag itself forward with its front claws, its hindquarters mangled. The dark ichor that oozed from its wounds was already starting to freeze, forming black, crystalline patterns on the floor. She put a final round into its head. It shuddered and was still. "Well," Thorne said, letting out a shaky breath, "that answers that question. They're hostile and resilient." Zara, who had remained pressed against the support beam throughout the brief, brutal firefight, slowly straightened up. Her face was chalk white. She stared at the dead creatures, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and a strange, academic focus. "Remarkable," she whispered. "Perfectly adapted to this environment. No visible optical organs. They must hunt by scent or vibration or something else." "They hunt us," Riley corrected bluntly, ejecting a spent casing. "That's all I need to know." Dr. Vance, her composure returning, knelt beside one of the dead crawlers, her sensor active. "Extraordinary physiology. The cellular structure is unlike anything I've ever encountered. It's almost crystalline, and the fluid, it's not blood, it's some kind of silica-based suspension." She looked up, her eyes grim. "And it's teeming with the same unknown spores we detected in the air, but in much higher concentrations. These things are walking biohazards." "So Reznikov's custodians are essentially living incubators for the Chernobog agent," Thorne surmised, a new layer of understanding dawning on his face. "They don't just guard it, they spread it." Carter, who had been staring at his monitors, suddenly let out a strangled gasp. "Oh no, 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 no." "What is it, Carter?" Lena demanded, turning towards him. "The gunfire," Carter stammered, pointing at his main screen. "It seems to have. It seems to have woken something else up. Something big, very big, and it's deep. In what Reznikov's journal called the core chamber." On the screen, a new blip had appeared. It was significantly larger than the signals generated by the pale crawlers, and it was moving. Slowly, ponderously, like something immense rousing itself from an ancient slumber. A low, guttural groan, far deeper and more resonant than the sounds the crawlers had made, echoed from the depths of the bunker. It was a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the facility, a sound that vibrated in their bones and teeth. It was followed by a heavy, dragging noise, as if something colossal were being pulled across the metal floor. The temperature in the entrance chamber, already frigid, seemed to plummet several more degrees. The icicles hanging from the ceiling tinkled faintly, like a ghostly wind chime. The carving of Chernobog on the far wall seemed to loom larger in the dim light, its multiple, spidery limbs appearing to writhe, its empty eyes promising unspeakable horrors. Zara clutched Reznikov's journal tighter. "The warden," she whispered, her voice filled with a new, profound terror. "He knows we're here." Chapter 5: Reznikov's Shadow. The guttural groan from the bunker's depths faded, replaced by that heavy, dragging sound. It was intermittent, a laborious scrape followed by a pause, then another scrape, each one seemingly closer than the last. The large, singular blip on Carter's screen pulsed with a slow, deliberate rhythm, a monstrous heartbeat echoing the unseen movement. Lena felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The pale crawlers were a threat, certainly, but this felt different. This felt like the main event. Reznikov, the warden, Patient Zero, transformed into something beyond human comprehension, now roused from his icy throne. "How far is it?" Thorne asked Carter, his voice betraying a tremor he couldn't quite conceal. He stared at the ominous blip on the screen as if it were a death sentence. Carter swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. It's hard to say with precision. The internal architecture of this place is a maze, and the signal is being distorted by whatever it is. But based on its speed and the last known position of the core chamber from Reznikov's schematics, I'd say it's still at least a kilometer away. Maybe more. He paused, then added in a small voice, but it's moving directly towards our sector. A kilometer is not far enough in a place like this, Lena stated grimly. We need to decide our next move. We can't stay in this entrance chamber. It's a kill box. She gestured to the wide, open space, the single entrance, and the ominous darkness of the corridor leading deeper in. Retreat outside, Riley suggested, his gaze flicking towards the massive, open blast doors. Try to regroup, call for evac. Carter shook his head. Comms are still garbage. That massive energy signature, whatever the warden is, it's blanketing most frequencies. I might get a burst transmission out, maybe, but it would be unencrypted, and there's no guarantee anyone would receive it, let alone act on it in time. And outside, he gestured vaguely towards the blizzard-swept plains beyond the bunker entrance. We wouldn't last a night out there without shelter, even if the crawlers didn't follow us. Misha Volkov, who had been silently observing the dead pale crawlers, spoke up, his voice a low rumble. The journal mentioned sealed sectors, Sector 4, where Reznikov said they trapped others. He looked at Zara. Are there schematics for these sealed sectors in the data you have? Zara nodded, quickly accessing her data slate. Its screen flickered, fighting the oppressive cold. Yes, Sector 4 is. It's a sub-level. According to these older plans, it was a biological research wing. Reznikov's notes suggest it had independent atmospheric controls and reinforced blast doors, if they sealed it properly. It might be defensible, Lena finished for her, or at least offer a temporary respite from him. She didn't want to say the warden. Giving it a name, even one from the journal, made it too real. Thorne considered this, rubbing his jaw. The initial shock of the crawler attack seemed to have focused him. A sealed sector, it's a risk. We don't know what's in there, if the seals held, or what happened to the people Reznikov said were trapped. He looked at the bodies of the pale crawlers. But it might be a better option than waiting here for that thing to arrive, or facing whatever else this bunker can throw at us. He made a decision. All right, Sector 4 is our immediate objective. Zara, guide us. Carter, pack up essential monitoring gear. We move light and fast. Riley, Misha, you take point with Lena. Vance, Lee, you're in the middle with me. We leave nothing behind that could be of use to whatever is out there. He glanced at the frozen corpse still slumped against the wall, the one that had held the journal. Except our silent welcomer. The team moved with a newfound urgency, a grim purpose replacing the earlier shock. Carter quickly disconnected his primary console, transferring essential sensor feeds to a smaller, portable unit. Dr. Vance took samples from the dead crawlers, her movements quick and efficient despite the lingering horror. Jian Lee scanned the inner blast doors again, confirming they were as inert and frozen as the outer ones seemed to be before their activation. Zara studied her data slate, her brow furrowed in concentration. Access to the Sector 4 stairwell should be through Primary Access Corridor B, the one those creatures came from. then a left turn into Service Tunnel Gamma. It's approximately 300 meters from this chamber. The same corridor they just emerged from, Riley noted dryly. Lovely. Any more of those things show up on your screen, Carter? Lena asked, her gaze fixed on the black maw of the corridor. Negative, Carter replied, his voice tight. The corridor itself is quiet, too quiet, but that large signature, it's definitely closer now. The dragging sound, it's more distinct. Lena nodded. Point team, let's move. Standard tactical formation. Watch your sectors. We don't know what else uses these tunnels. With Lena, Riley, and Misha in the lead, their flashlight beams cutting sharp, nervous arcs into the oppressive darkness, the team plunged into primary access corridor. The air here was even colder, the scent of ozone and decay more pungent. The walls were sheer, dark metal, coated in patches of the same black, crystalline ice they had seen in the entrance chamber. The floor was littered with debris, twisted pieces of metal, shattered conduits, and strange, dried organic matter that crunched underfoot like frozen leaves. The only sounds were their own footsteps, their breathing, and the distant, rhythmic dragging, a constant, ominous reminder of the pursuit. Zara, close behind Misha, occasionally consulted her data slate, murmuring directions. The junction for Service Tunnel Gamma should be just ahead. Yes, there. Ahead, a narrower tunnel branched off to the left. Unlike the main corridor, this one was darker, its entrance partially obscured by a fall of ice-encrusted debris. The air wafting from it felt heavy, stagnant. This is it, Zara confirmed. Service Tunnel Gamma. According to the schematics, it should lead directly to the Sector 4 access point. Lena signaled a halt. She swept her light into the narrower tunnel. It was tight, barely wide enough for two people to walk abreast. The walls were lined with pipes and conduits, all frozen, many of them ruptured and spilling their icy contents onto the floor. Strange, fungus-like growths, pale and luminous, clung to the walls in patches, casting a faint, ghostly glow. Looks like a perfect spot for an ambush, Riley muttered, his rifle ready. Misha, take a look, Lena ordered. The big geologist squeezed past her and peered into the tunnel, his powerful flashlight beam probing its depths. He sniffed the air. No immediate sign of crawlers, but this place, it feels different, older. The air is dead. The fungus, Dr. Vance observed, shining her own light on the pale growths. It's bioluminescent, another extremophile. This bunker is a perverse ecosystem. We don't have time for a nature walk, Thorne said impatiently. Is it clear? As clear as anything in this hellhole can be, Lena replied. Riley, you're on point down this one. I'll take rear guard for this section. Misha, stay with Zara. They entered Service Tunnel Gamma. The oppressive silence of the main corridor was replaced by a new set of sounds. The drip, drip, drip of unseen water echoing strangely. The crunch of their boots on the debris-strewn floor, and a faint, almost inaudible hum that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The tunnel twisted and turned, descending gradually. The bioluminescent fungi became more prevalent, casting the narrow passage in an eerie, shifting green-white light, allowing them to reduce their reliance on flashlights. It was a relief in one sense, as it conserved battery power, but the ghostly illumination was profoundly unsettling, making shadows dance and playing tricks on the eyes. Zara paused at a junction where a rusted, heavy door, bent and buckled, hung precariously from one hinge. This was a maintenance access point, according to the plans. It should lead to a secondary generator room. She touched the cold metal of the door. Reznikov mentioned that some staff tried to barricade themselves in these auxiliary rooms during the initial outbreak. He never found out what happened to them. A cold draft emanated from behind the ruined door. Lena pushed it open a little further with the barrel of her rifle. The darkness beyond was absolute, and it carried a charnel scent that made her recoil. "We stick to the plan," Thorne said firmly. "Sector 4, no detours." They pressed on. The dragging sound from behind them from the direction of the main corridors seemed to be keeping pace, a relentless, unseen pursuer. Every so often Carter would give an update. It's maintaining distance, still approximately the same, but it hasn't stopped. The tunnel began to narrow further. In places, they had to turn sideways to squeeze through sections partially blocked by fallen pipes or ice formations. The air grew heavier, more humid, despite the intense cold. The dripping sounds were louder now. Then Misha, who was now in the lead with Riley, stopped abruptly. He held up a hand. "Listen." They all froze, the dripping, the humming, their own breathing, and something else. A faint, rhythmic sound, a whisper. No, not a whisper. A sob. A low, mournful, human-sounding sob echoing from somewhere ahead in the darkness. Zara's eyes widened. The journal. Reznikov mentioned the weeping oracles, former scientists, transformed. The sobbing sound came again, closer this time, accompanied by a soft, wet, dragging noise, different from the one that pursued them. This was softer, more intimate, and somehow more horrific. Riley aimed his flashlight beam down the tunnel. About 20 meters ahead, the passage opened slightly into what looked like a small, circular chamber. And in the center of that chamber, illuminated by the beam, was a sight that defied sanity. It was a pulsating mass of pale, translucent flesh, roughly hemispherical, fused to the floor and walls of the chamber. It was perhaps 2 meters across. Embedded within its quivering surface like flies in amber were several recognizably human faces, their eyes closed, their features contorted in expressions of eternal, silent sorrow. Tears, thick and viscous like oil, oozed from their closed eyelids, carving glistening trails down the pulsating flesh. The sobbing sound emanated from this grotesque amalgamation. And as they watched, horrified, one of the embedded faces slowly turned its sightless gaze towards them, its lips parting to release another heart-wrenching sob. Chapter 6: The Weeping Chamber. The sight of the pulsating, flesh-and-face amalgamation, the weeping oracle, as Reznikov's journal had chillingly named it, rooted them to the spot. The sobbing sound it emitted was not just auditory. It resonated deep within Lena's chest, a physical manifestation of unending sorrow that clawed at her composure. The air in the tunnel grew thick with a cloying, sickly sweet odor, like overripe fruit mixed with antiseptic. Zara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her data slate clattering to the icy floor. Those faces, there, the archival photographs of Riznikov's core team, Dr. Anya Sharma, head of viral cultivation, Professor Grigor Volkov, no relation to Misha, a specialist in cellular regeneration. I recognize them. Her voice was a horrified whisper. Misha Volkov looked away, his weathered face pale, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Riley swore under his breath, a low, guttural sound of pure revulsion. Even Thorne, usually driven by a cold ambition, seemed momentarily stunned into silence, his flashlight beam wavering on the grotesque display. Dr. Vance, however, after an initial sharp intake of breath, seemed to shift into professional mode, though her voice was strained. It's a colonial organism, or a fusion of multiple individuals. The cellular boundaries have clearly broken down. The Chernobog agent. It doesn't just mutate, it integrates, subsumes. The embedded face that had turned towards them, Anya Sharma's face, Zara had identified, though now distorted and translucent, let out another long, shuddering sob. Then its lips moved, and a voice, soft and filled with an almost unbearable grief, echoed in their minds rather than their ears. It wasn't spoken language. It was a wave of pure, distilled emotion, a telepathic projection of sorrow and warning. Too late, he comes. The mental voice was fractured, interspersed with flashes of imagery, a vast, dark chamber, a pulsating black crystal, a towering, shadowy figure with burning eyes, Riznikov, but no longer human. Lena felt a jolt, not of fear, but of dawning, horrific understanding. This thing, this weeping oracle, wasn't just a passive horror. It was aware, and it was trying to communicate. "It's warning us," Lena said, her voice low, "about Riznikov, the warden." The face of Anya Sharma seemed to nod, a slow, agonizing movement within the pulsating mass. More oily tears welled from its closed eyes. "He knows, he feels you. His children tasted your anger. Now he comes for the source, the journal." The journal, Thorne seized on the word. He looked at the leather-bound book still clutched in Zara's hands. "It wants the journal." The mental voice confirmed, a wave of despair washing over them. His memories, his anchor to what he was, he desires it. To complete the transformation, or to unmake it, he is, confused, lost in the cold dream. "This is insane," Carter stammered from the rear, his voice barely audible. It's talking to us, in our heads." Jian Li, the cryogenics expert who had been mostly silent until now, spoke up, her voice surprisingly steady. "The Chernobog agent. Riznikov wrote it had psionic properties. Perhaps this is a side effect of prolonged exposure or a specific mutation." The sobbing from the oracle intensified, and a new wave of images flooded Lena's mind. The pale crawlers, skittering through dark tunnels, overwhelming terrified scientists in white coats. The bunker's corridors slick with blood and black ice. The desperate, futile attempts to seal off sections. The screams. Lena pushed the horrific images away, focusing on the tactical situation. The oracle, for all its horrifying appearance, didn't seem immediately aggressive. It was trapped, a prisoner of its own grotesque transformation. But the warden. "How do we get past it?" Riley asked, his rifle still aimed at the oracle, though his finger was off the trigger. The tunnel opened into this small chamber, and the oracle blocked the only obvious exit on the far side. The oracle seemed to sense his question. The face of Professor Grigor Volkov, embedded near the base of the fleshy mound, slowly turned towards them. Its lips moved, and a different mental voice, deeper, more resonant but equally sorrowful, touched their minds. The path is through pain. His pain, our pain, show him, you understand. Show him we understand, Zara repeated, bewildered. What does that mean? A new image flashed into their minds. The journal, open, its pages illuminated. Then the image of the warden, hesitating, his shadowy form flickering. It wants us to read from the journal, Lena guessed, to the warden. A wave of affirmation accompanied by intense sorrow, his words, his fading light, a spark, in the endless dark. This is a trap, Riley growled. It's trying to distract us. That big son of a bitch is still coming. The dragging sound has stopped, Carter suddenly announced from the rear. They all froze. It was true. The constant, rhythmic scraping that had been their unseen pursuer had ceased. A heavy silence descended, broken only by the soft sobs of the oracle and the drip, drip, drip of water somewhere in the oppressive darkness. Then a new sound, a soft, almost gentle exhalation like wind through a broken reed. It came from the tunnel behind them, the way they had just come. Lena spun around, her rifle up. Misha and Riley did likewise. The narrow passage they had just traversed was now filled with an impenetrable darkness, a blackness so profound it seemed to swallow the beams of their flashlights. And from that darkness, 2 points of cold, blue light ignited, like distant, malevolent stars. "He's here," Thorne whispered, his voice cracking. The 2 blue lights began to move slowly, deliberately towards them. They were eyes. And as they drew closer, a colossal, shadowy form began to coalesce around them, a figure that seemed to drink the light, its outline indistinct, shifting, as if it were made of solidified shadow and frozen rage. It was the warden, Reznikov. He was immense, far larger than a man, his form a grotesque parody of the human shape. His skin, where it was visible, was like the bark of an ancient, frost-covered tree, interwoven with pulsing black veins that seemed to glow with the same cold blue light as his eyes. Shards of what looked like lab equipment and cryopipes were fused into his flesh, protruding at unnatural angles, like the growths of a metallic cancer. One arm was disproportionately long, ending in fingers like frozen talons. The other was a stump, from which writhing, cable-like tendrils snaked, crackling with faint sparks of blue energy. He moved with a slow, ponderous gait, each step a heavy, deliberate impact on the metal floor, the source of the earlier dragging sounds now clear. One of his legs was malformed, dragging uselessly, encased in a mass of black ice and twisted metal. The warden stopped at the entrance to the chamber, his glowing blue eyes fixing on the group, then on the weeping oracle, then, with an almost tangible hunger, on the journal in Zara's trembling hands. A voice, not mental this time, but a true, physical voice, rasped from what must have been his throat. It was like the grinding of glaciers, the cracking of ancient ice, a sound that scraped the nerves raw. "My words." Zara flinched as if struck. The weeping oracle let out a renewed series of heart-wrenching sobs. He seeks to remember or to forget. Anya Sharma's mental voice pleaded, the spark, show him the spark. Lena's mind raced. They were trapped. The warden blocked their retreat. The oracle blocked their path forward. Fighting their way through either seemed suicidal. The warden radiated an aura of immense power and unimaginable cold. The very air around him seemed to shimmer, and frost was visibly forming on the walls and ceiling where his shadow fell. "The journal, Zara," Lena said, her voice tight, never taking her eyes off the warden. "What did it say? Read something, anything." Zara, pale and shaking, fumbled with the frozen pages of Riznikov's journal. Her fingers were clumsy with cold and fear. I don't know. Which part?" The warden took another ponderous step into the chamber, his blue eyes burning. The tendrils on his stump-arm writhed, crackling with increased energy. "Now, Zara," Thorne urged, his pistol aimed squarely at the warden's massive chest, though it looked like a pea-shooter against a behemoth. Zara's eyes scanned a page frantically. She licked her dry lips and began to read, her voice trembling, echoing strangely in the confined space, a fragile human sound against the monstrous presence of the warden and the sorrowful cries of the oracle. "October 17th, she began, her voice gaining a little strength. "We have breached the primary geode. The cold is alive, not like the surface cold. This is ancient, a stillness from before time." As Zara read, the warden stopped his advance. His head, a misshapen mass of frozen flesh and protruding metal, tilted slightly, as if listening. The blue glow in his eyes flickered, dimmed for a heartbeat. The writhing tendrils on his arm slowed their frenetic movement. The weeping oracle's sobs softened, becoming a low, mournful hum. Zara continued, her voice growing steadier as she focused on the words, on the task. She read about Professor Volkovsky's theories, about the Chernobog agent's symbiosis with the ancient cold, about the initial frustrations of Ryznikov, the driven scientist, before his descent into madness. The warden remained motionless, a colossal statue of ice and shadow, his burning eyes fixed on Zara. The tension in the chamber was unbearable. Lena could feel sweat, cold and clammy, on her forehead, despite the frigid temperature. Every muscle in her body was coiled tight. She watched the warden's massive, clawed hand. It was slowly unclenching, then clenching again, as if some internal conflict were raging within the monstrous form. "The path is through pain. His pain, our pain." The oracle's earlier message echoed in Lena's mind. Was this it? Was this memory, this echo of his former self, the spark the oracle had spoken of? Or was it merely a prelude to a more savage, focused attack? The air crackled with an unseen energy. The bioluminescent fungi on the walls pulsed erratically, their ghostly light flaring and dimming in time with some unfelt rhythm. The choice was stark. Trust the desperate, sorrowful guidance of the weeping oracle, or try to fight their way out against impossible odds. Chapter 7: Echoes of Anatoly. Zara's voice, though laced with a tremor she couldn't entirely suppress, filled the small, fungi-lit chamber. She read on from Anatoly Riznikov's journal, her words painting a vivid, horrifying picture of a brilliant mind slowly unraveling, of scientific ambition curdling into obsessive madness. She spoke of the beautiful, dark light of the core agent, of the whispers it had offered, promises of power and understanding that had seduced Riznikov. The warden remained still, a towering silhouette against the deeper darkness of the tunnel he had emerged from. The blue fire in his eyes, though still intense, seemed less overtly hostile, more contemplative, if such a word could be applied to a being of such monstrous aspect. The writhing tendrils on his ruined arm had ceased their aggressive crackling, now swaying gently, like kelp in a slow current. Lena watched him, every nerve ending screaming. Her rifle was trained on his massive head, her finger a hair's breadth from the trigger. Beside her, Riley and Misha maintained a similar state of readiness, their weapons unwavering. This fragile truce, if that's what it was, felt like it could shatter at any moment. The weeping oracle's mournful hum provided a bizarre, sorrowful counterpoint to Zara's recitation. The faces embedded in its flesh were all turned towards the warden, their expressions unreadable, a mixture of fear, pity, and perhaps a desperate hope. Zara's voice faltered as she reached the entries detailing the first animal trials, the unspeakable transformations. She hesitated, her gaze flicking up towards the warden. "Keep reading," Lena ordered, her voice a low command. She saw a flicker in the warden's eyes as Zara paused, a momentary return of that aggressive, predatory light. Swallowing hard, Zara continued, her voice dropping as she recounted Riznikov's descent into creating his guardians, his monsters. November 12th, Zara read, her voice cracking slightly. The agent does not kill, it remakes, the flesh, the bone, it twists, but the eyes remain aware. Riznikov calls it accelerated adaptive mutation. I call it damnation. At the word damnation, a low groan rumbled from the warden's chest, a sound like shifting tectonic plates. His massive, clawed hand twitched. The blue light in his eyes pulsed. For a terrifying moment, Lena thought he was going to charge. But then he did something entirely unexpected. He slowly, ponderously raised his intact, clawed hand, the one that wasn't a mass of writhing tendrils, towards his own head, his misshapen face. His movements were stiff, unnatural, as if he were fighting the very ice and metal that composed his form. The claws, long and sharp as daggers, touched the side of his head, where an ear might once have been. It was a gesture of listening or perhaps of pain. The weeping oracle's hum deepened, and a fresh wave of sorrowful imagery washed through Lena's mind. Riznikov in his lab coat, his face pale and drawn, clutching his head, his eyes wide with a dawning horror as the whispers intensified, as the transformation began to take hold. The images were fragmented, fleeting, but undeniably potent. Zara, sensing the shift, pressed on, her voice gaining a desperate urgency. She read of Boris, the colleague whose skin began to resemble the bunker's ice, who was taken to the medbay and never returned. She read of the alarms, the catastrophic release of the custodian strains, the sealing of Sector 4, the desperate cries of those trapped within. With each recalled horror, the warden seemed to shrink, not physically, but his aura of overwhelming menace diminished, replaced by something akin to confusion. The blue light in his eyes flickered more erratically. He let out another low groan, this one laced with a new note, a note that sounded disturbingly like anguish. Finally, Zara reached the last, frantic entries. Reznikov's dawning realization of his own transformation, his desperate attempt to reach the outer doors, to warn the outside world, his final, scrawled plea to be remembered, to acknowledge the price of his ambition. It's in me, the cold, the whispers, I can feel it, twisting. Zara's voice was barely a whisper now, thick with unshed tears. This journal, it is all that is left of me, of Anatoly, my name, is Anatoly Reznikov. Remember me, remember, the price. When she finished the last smeared word, an absolute silence fell upon the chamber. The weeping oracle was quiet. The warden stood motionless, his head bowed slightly, his clawed hand still pressed to the side of his monstrous face. The blue light in his eyes was now dim, flickering like dying embers. For a long, agonizing moment nothing happened. No one moved. No one breathed. Then the warden slowly lowered his hand. He raised his head, and the blue light in his eyes flared, not with aggression but with a clear, cold, and utterly desolate light. He looked at Zara, then at the journal she held. His voice, when he spoke, was still the grinding of glaciers, but the rage was gone, replaced by an almost human-sounding weariness, a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. Anatoly, he rasped, I was Anatoly. A collective gasp went through the group. Carter actually stumbled back a step, his hand clapped over his mouth. The warden took a hesitant, dragging step forward, not towards them but towards the weeping oracle. He stopped before the pulsating mass of flesh, his colossal form dwarfing it. He reached out his clawed hand, slowly, hesitantly, towards the embedded face of Anya Sharma. The oracle did not recoil. Its sobbing had ceased entirely. Anya Sharma's face, still streaked with oily tears, seemed to look up at the warden with an expression of infinite pity. The warden's razor-sharp claws hovered inches from her translucent cheek. Then, with a tenderness that was utterly incongruous with his horrific appearance, he gently, almost reverently, touched the place where her tears flowed. A soft, blue glow emanated from his fingertips, spreading across the surface of the oracle, causing the embedded faces to shimmer. The oracle let out a soft sigh, a sound that was not of sorrow but of release. He remembers. Anya Sharma's mental voice whispered, fainter now but clear, the spark. It burns still. The warden kept his hand on the oracle for a long moment. Then he slowly withdrew it. He turned his gaze back to the team, his blue eyes now holding a discernible, tragic intelligence. The path, he rasped, his voice still a torturous effort. Sector 4, the seals may hold for a time. He gestured with his clawed hand towards the dark opening on the far side of the chamber, the one previously blocked by the oracle. The pulsating mass had now shifted, drawn back slightly, revealing a narrow, dark passage. Go, flee, before the other awakes. The other, Thorne seized on the words. What other, you mean? The Chernobog agent itself, the core. The warden's head tilted, a slow, painful movement. The blue light in his eyes flickered dangerously. It sleeps in the black ice, but it dreams you're coming. The gunfire disturbed its slumber. My children are but extensions of its will. I am its unwilling vessel. He clutched at his chest where a piece of twisted metal was embedded like a stake. This shell I fight, but it is strong. Why are you helping us? Lena asked, her voice quiet, though her rifle remained aimed. She couldn't reconcile this creature of nightmare with the tortured echoes of Anatoly Riznikov. The warden's gaze found hers. The desolation in his eyes was profound. The journal, Anatoly, he did not want this, none of this. A shudder ran through his massive frame. The price must not be for nothing. He took a step back towards the tunnel from which he had emerged. Go, Sector 4. There may be answers or only more darkness, but I cannot hold it much longer. The blue light in his eyes began to intensify again, the earlier confusion and sorrow being slowly, visibly overridden by a colder, more predatory gleam. The tendrils on his stump arm began to writhe with renewed agitation, crackling with sparks. It reasserts itself, the warden rasped, his voice once again taking on that harsh, grinding quality. The hunger returns. He looked at the journal in Zara's hand, and a flicker of the old, possessive hunger burned in his eyes. Go now. The weeping oracle's mental scream was urgent, filled with a renewed terror. His light fades. Run. The oracle began to sob again, loud, heart-wrenching cries that echoed the earlier despair. It pulsed violently, its form shrinking further away from the passage it had revealed. The warden let out a roar, a sound that was no longer even remotely human, a blast of pure, elemental fury and pain. He clutched at his head, his massive claws digging into his own frozen flesh. The blue light in his eyes blazed. He's losing control, Lena shouted. Move now. She didn't need to tell them twice. Zara, clutching the journal, scrambled towards the newly revealed passage. Carter, Vance, and Lee were right behind her. Thorne hesitated for a split second, his gaze fixed on the warden, as if weighing some desperate, unspoken option, then seemed to think better of it and followed. Riley and Misha began to fall back, covering the retreat, their rifles still aimed at the warden, who was now thrashing, his roars echoing through the tunnels. Chunks of ice and metal flew from his flailing limbs. Lena was the last to enter the narrow passage, her eyes locked on the warden. The intelligence, the sorrow, the fleeting humanity of Anatoly Riznikov was gone, consumed by the monstrous rage of the Chernobog entity that wore his form. All that remained was the predator, the guardian, the thing of ice and fury. As she slipped into the darkness of the new tunnel, the last thing she saw was the warden, his eyes blazing with an unholy blue light, turning his terrifying gaze from the weeping oracle and towards the passage where they had fled. The hunt was on again. Chapter 8. The Stench of Despair. The narrow passage was even tighter than Service Tunnel Gamma, forcing them into single file. Zara, still clutching Riznikov's journal, was in the lead, her data slate held precariously in one hand, its faint glow illuminating the oppressive darkness. The air here was thick, almost unbreathable, heavy with the stench of stale water, rust, and an underlying, deeply unsettling organic odor, the smell of old decay, of forgotten miseries. Lena brought up the rear, her senses straining, listening for any sound of pursuit from the chamber they had just vacated. For now, there was nothing but the echoing roars of the warden, gradually fatting as they put distance between themselves and the weeping oracle's domain. But she knew that respite was temporary. The entity, or Riznikov in his lucid moments, had been clear. It would come. "Zara, any idea where this tunnel leads?" Thorne panted from somewhere ahead in the darkness. The pace was quick, bordering on a run, and the uneven, debris-strewn floor made progress treacherous. "According to the schematics, this is an emergency maintenance access conduit," Zara replied, her voice tight with exertion. "It should bypass some of the more heavily damaged sections of this level and lead us towards the primary stairwell for Sector 4, if the plans are accurate, and if this tunnel is still intact." The passage twisted sharply, descending at a steep angle. Water, or some other viscous fluid, trickled down the walls, making the already slick metal treacherous underfoot. The bioluminescent fungi were absent here. Their only illumination came from Zara's data slate and the occasional, nervous sweep of a flashlight beam. "The warden, Anatoly, he said the seals on Sector 4 may hold," Carter piped up, his voice echoing unnaturally. "That doesn't sound too reassuring." "It's the only option we have right now, Carter," Lena snapped, her patience wearing thin. The brief, terrifying encounter with the struggling consciousness within the warden had been profoundly disturbing, but the tactical reality remained. They were being hunted by a monstrous entity with unknown capabilities. Focus on moving. The tunnel opened slightly, and they found themselves in a small, circular junction, little more than a widening of the passage. Several other tunnels, dark and foreboding, branched off from it. Most were blocked by cave-ins or heavy, rusted grates. Zara consulted her slate, its light reflecting in her wide, fearful eyes. This is not on the schematics I have. This junction isn't marked." A collective wave of unease passed through the group. "Lost," Riley growled from ahead. "We can't afford to be lost down here." Misha Volkov, his flashlight beam probing the different tunnel mouths, shook his head. "These other passages, they look very old, older than the main construction. Look at the rock work where it is exposed." He pointed to a section where the metal lining had peeled away, revealing rough-hewn stone, slick with moisture. "This bunker was built around something pre-existing. These tunnels could lead anywhere, or nowhere." The distant roars of the warden had ceased. An oppressive silence descended, broken only by their harsh breathing and the constant, unnerving drip of water. Lena didn't like this new silence. It felt charged, anticipatory. "The warden mentioned another entity," Dr. Vance said, her voice low. The core agent itself. He said our coming disturbed its slumber. What if these older tunnels lead towards it?" The thought was terrifying. They had barely survived encounters with Riznikov's children and the tormented remnants of his consciousness. The prospect of facing the source of the Chernobog agent, the dreaming intelligence in the black ice, was unthinkable. "We need to find the way to Sector 4, Thorne said, his voice firm though Lena could hear the underlying strain. Zara, are there any structural markers, any designations on the walls? Zara swept her light around the small chamber. The metal walls were coated in grime and rust. Then she stopped, her beam focused on a small, almost obscured plate near the entrance of one of the tunnels, not the one they had emerged from. It was heavily corroded, but faint Cyrillic lettering was just visible. Esjekete AR4 ave eriakratkoi in yeruikratkoi de ostup, Zara read slowly. Sector 4, emergency access. This must be it. Relief, palpable and immediate, washed over the group. The chosen tunnel looked no more inviting than the others, equally dark and debris-strewn, but at least it had a designation. Riley, Misha, take point again, Lena ordered. Let's move, quickly but carefully. They plunged into the new passage. This one was wider, allowing for a slightly faster pace, but the air quality was noticeably worse. The smell of decay was stronger, mixed with a sharp chemical tang that burned Lena's nostrils. The floor was littered with more debris, discarded tools, scraps of clothing, and what looked disturbingly like gnawed bones. This sector, Dr. Vance murmured, her flashlight beam playing over a pile of tattered fabric that might once have been a lab coat. Riznikov said they sealed people in here during the outbreak. If anyone survived the initial chaos, what would they have become after decades of isolation, with dwindling supplies and surrounded by whatever else might have been trapped in here with them? Her words cast a fresh pall over the group. They were heading into a sealed tomb, a place of unknown horrors, hopping to find sanctuary. The irony was not lost on Lena. The tunnel began to slope downwards more steeply. Ahead, they could see a faint, flickering light. Not the ghostly green of the fungi, but a more conventional, artificial light. "What's that?" Carter asked, his voice hopeful. "Power." "Careful," Lena cautioned. "Could be anything." As they drew closer, they saw it was a single, bare bulb, hanging from a conduit, casting a weak, yellow, flickering glow. It illuminated a heavy, reinforced steel door set into the side of the tunnel. The door was emblazoned with a large, stenciled 4 and Cyrillic warnings. Opea esena yazeoena, en yevekade te yeri, be yezer yeshaya en iya. Dangerous zone, do not enter without permission. The door itself was intact, but its frame was scarred, buckled in places, as if something immensely powerful had tried to force its way in, or out. Beside the door was a heavy, wheel-like mechanism, similar to the ones on the main bunker doors but smaller. And unlike the others, this one seemed less encrusted with ice. "This is it," Zara breathed. "The primary access to Sector 4. She checked her slate. "The seals should be internal if Riznikov's team managed to activate them." "Then this door should be locked from the other side," Thorne finished. He approached the door cautiously, examining the wheel. No obvious external controls for this one. If it's sealed, it's sealed. Riley pushed against the door. It didn't budge. He put his shoulder to it and heaved. The metal groaned but held firm. "Solid," he grunted. "There might be another way," Zara said, pointing her slate further down the main tunnel they were in. "The schematics show this emergency access conduit continues, eventually leading to a secondary, smaller maintenance hatch into Sector 4. It was designed for utility access, not personnel. It might be less secure. "Lead the way," Thorne said, glancing nervously back up the tunnel they had come from. The silence from that direction was still deeply unsettling. They continued, leaving the ominously sealed door 4 behind. The tunnel narrowed again, becoming little more than a crawl space in places. The stench of decay intensified. Here, the walls were not metal, but rough-hewn rock, slick with moisture and coated in patches of slimy, dark mold that seemed to absorb the light. Lena, bringing up the rear, felt a growing sense of dread. This place felt primal, ancient. The air was heavy, suffocating. Every shadow seemed to hide a waiting threat. After another 100 meters of claustrophobic progress, Zara stopped. This should be it. Ahead, set into the rock wall, was a small, rusted metal hatch, no more than a meter square. It was secured by a simple rotating latch, heavily corroded. "That's a maintenance hatch," Carter sounded incredulous. "It looks like something out of a medieval dungeon." Misha examined the latch, rusted solid but perhaps not too strong. He braced himself and pulled. The metal shrieked in protest, flakes of rust falling, but the latch held. Riley joined him, and together they put their combined strength into it. With a sudden, jarring crack, the latch snapped. The small, heavy hatch swung inwards with a groan, revealing an opening into utter blackness. A wave of foul air washed over them, so thick, so fetid, it made Lena gag. It was the smell of concentrated despair, of long-forgotten death, of things left to rot in the dark for decades. "Gods," Zara whispered, recoiling from the opening, her hand covering her nose and mouth. Dr. Vance, despite her revulsion, aimed her flashlight into the darkness beyond the hatch. The beam illuminated a small, cramped space, littered with debris, and something else. Shapes. Indistinct, huddled shapes covered in dust and cobwebs. "Are those bodies?" Thorne asked, his voice hushed. Lena pushed past the others, her own light cutting through the gloom. They were bodies, or what was left of them. Skeletal remains curled in fetal positions, clad in the tattered remnants of lab coats and civilian clothing. At least a dozen of them crammed into this small antechamber. They hadn't been killed by monsters. They had simply wasted away, trapped, forgotten. On the far wall of this small, corpse-filled room, another, larger door was visible. This one, too, was heavy steel, with a small, reinforced window of thick, yellowed glass set into it. A faint, flickering light, similar to the one they had seen outside door 4, was visible through the grimy window. "They were trying to get out," Misha said, his voice heavy with a sorrow that mirrored the oracle's. "Or trying to keep something else in." Scratched into the metal of the inner door, clearly visible in their flashlight beams, were desperate, overlapping messages, gouged into the steel as if by fingernails or sharp stones. Most were in Russian. "Let us out. They are coming. No food, no water. The angels are weeping. CHRNOBOG sees all. He is one of us now." And chillingly, repeated over and over again like a mad litany, "The ice has a hunger." This was not a sanctuary. This was a tomb, filled with the echoes of madness and despair, and they were about to step inside. Chapter 9. The Madman's Etchings. The stench from the small antechamber was overpowering, a physical assault. The sight of the skeletal remains, huddled together in their final, desperate moments, coupled with the frantic, mad etchings on the inner door, painted a grim prelude to what lay beyond in Sector 4. This was no sanctuary. It was a charnel house, a testament to a slow, agonizing demise. Lena pushed aside a wave of nausea, her training kicking in. Carter, Vance, check the air quality beyond that inner door. If those people died of asphyxiation or some airborne toxin, we need to know before we open it. Dr. Vance, her face pale but set with determination, produced a fine probe from her kit. Carter assisted, carefully guiding the probe through a small, rust-eaten hole near the edge of the grimy window on the inner door. They watched the readings on Vance's handheld sensor. Atmosphere is surprisingly stable, Vance reported after a moment, her voice tinged with disbelief. Oxygen levels are low but breathable for a limited time. High CO2 as expected, traces of methane, ammonia, but no acute airborne toxins detected beyond what we've already encountered. Whatever killed them in here, it was slow. She looked at the skeletal remains. Starvation, dehydration, despair. Thorne ran a hand over his face, his expression grim. So the seals held, they trapped these poor souls in and kept, whatever else, out or in with them. He gestured to the disturbing etchings. He is one of us now. The ice has a hunger. What does that mean? Zara, who had been studying the frantic messages with a mixture of horror and academic intensity, shook her head. It's the language of madness. Isolation, terror, perhaps the influence of the Chernobog agent itself, even through sealed doors. Reznikov wrote about its psionic properties, its ability to induce paranoia and hallucinations. This door, Misha said, examining the heavy steel portal. It has a locking mechanism, but it looks standard, not the oversized wheels of the primary bunker access points, more like a bank vault door. He pointed to a recessed handle and a combination dial, both heavily rusted. "Can you open it?" Lena asked. Misha grunted. "The combination is long lost, I imagine, but the rust, it might have weakened the mechanism. Riley, give me a hand." Together, the two powerful men gripped the recessed handle. They strained, their muscles bulging. The metal groaned in protest, a high-pitched screech that echoed in the confined space. Dust and flakes of rust rained down. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sudden, jarring snap, something internal gave way. The door shuddered, and a narrow crack appeared along its edge. Foul, stagnant air, even more potent than what was in the antechamber, billowed out. It was laden with the same sense of decay and despair, but with an added, sharper tang, something chemical, acidic, that burned the back of Lena's throat. "Get ready," Lena warned, her rifle pointed at the growing gap. With another concerted heave, Riley and Misha pulled the heavy door outwards. It swung open with agonizing slowness, its rusted hinges screaming, revealing a corridor beyond. The corridor was dimly lit by the same weak, flickering emergency lights they had seen outside the other sealed entrance to Sector 4. The walls were lined with what looked like laboratory benches, overturned and smashed. Glassware lay shattered on the floor, glittering like deadly frost in the dim light. Cabinets hung open, their contents spilled and ransacked. Papers and documents were strewn everywhere, many of them charred or water-damaged, others covered in a thick, dark mold. And the smell. It was worse in here, a suffocating miasma of chemicals, rot, and something else, something that Lena's Spetsnaz training recognized with a cold dread, the unmistakable, coppery scent of old, dried blood. A lot of it. Gods, Carter whispered, his voice barely audible. What happened in here? This was a laboratory wing, Dr. Vance said, her voice hushed as she took in the scene of utter devastation. Biochemistry, viral propagation, judging by the equipment, what's left of it. Lena stepped cautiously into the corridor, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, sweeping from side to side. Riley and Misha fanned out behind her. The floor was slick in places, not just with water but with something darker, stickier. The walls were covered in more etchings. These were not just words but bizarre, disturbing symbols, sprawling, overlapping, almost like a madman's tapestry. Circles within circles, eyes that stared from the plaster, spidery, multi-limbed figures that resembled the monstrous carving of Chernobog they had seen in the entrance chamber. And everywhere those same chilling phrases. The ice has a hunger. He sees. We are the chosen. This isn't just despair, Zara murmured, her eyes wide as she scanned the grotesque graffiti. This is worship, or a descent into it. They moved slowly down the corridor, their boots crunching on shattered glass and debris. Side doors led off into what were presumably individual labs, most of them dark and uninviting, their doors either jammed shut or hanging precariously from broken hinges. From one of the darkened labs, a faint sound reached them, a soft, rhythmic scratching. Lena signaled a halt. They all froze, listening. Scratch, pause, scratch, pause. It was coming from behind a closed door, one that was relatively intact but bore deep gouge marks around its edges, as if something had tried to claw its way in or out. Riley moved to the door, his ear pressed against the cold steel. He nodded slowly. Something's in there, small though, doesn't sound like our pale crawler friends. Lena considered their options. They needed to find a secure place, somewhere defensible, ideally with a secondary exit if possible. Exploring every darkened lab was a risk they couldn't afford unless necessary. But leaving an unknown entity behind them was also a tactical nightmare. Thorne, what do the schematics show for this sector? Lena asked. Is there a central control room, a security station? Thorne, looking pale and shaken by the visceral horror of Sector 4, consulted his own data slate, which he had retrieved from Carter. There's a primary research lab designated Lab Alpha. It's at the end of this main corridor. Beyond that, the plans show a small security monitoring station, and further on, what looks like a larger cryo-storage facility. He paused. That's where Riznikov and his team were apparently experimenting with weaponizing the Chernobog agent on a larger scale. The weaponizing part sounds bad, Carter muttered. Just saying. The scratching sound from behind the door stopped. A new sound replaced it, a soft, almost inaudible whimper. Lena exchanged a glance with Riley. That wasn't the sound of a monster. That sounded like an animal, a distressed animal. "I'm checking it out," Lena said. "Riley with me. The rest of you hold this position, cover the corridor." She approached the door cautiously. The handle was missing, a jagged hole in its place. She pushed gently. The door creaked open a few inches. Peering through the gap, she saw only darkness. The whimpering sound came again, closer now. Taking a deep breath, Lena pushed the door fully open and stepped inside, her rifle ready, flashlight beam cutting through the blackness. Riley followed, covering her flank. The lab was small, even more devastated than the corridor. Equipment was smashed, benches overturned. A thick layer of dust and grime covered everything. And in the far corner, huddled beneath a shattered table, was a dog. It was a medium-sized breed, possibly a Leka or a similar Siberian type, its fur matted and filthy, its ribs clearly visible beneath its skin. It was emaciated, weak, but its eyes, when they caught the beam of Lena's flashlight, were alert, intelligent, and filled with an almost unbearable fear. It let out another soft whimper and pressed itself further into the corner, trembling violently. It wore a simple leather collar but no tags. "Easy, boy," Lena said softly, lowering her rifle slightly. "Easy now." This was unexpected. An animal alive after all these decades. It seemed impossible. The dog flinched at her voice but didn't growl or show any aggression. It just lay there, trembling, its frightened eyes fixed on her. "How?" Riley began, then trailed off, his rugged face etched with disbelief. Lena approached slowly, her movements calm, non-threatening. She knelt down a few feet from the dog. "It's okay. We're not going to hurt you." She looked around the small lab. There were empty, overturned food bowls, scraps of what might have been leather or heavy fabric chewed to pieces. And in one corner, a pile of bones, small animal bones, rats perhaps, picked clean. "It's been surviving in here somehow," Lena murmured. "Living off vermin. There must be water dripping somewhere." She noticed a small, steady drip from a broken pipe in the ceiling, forming a shallow puddle in a cracked beaker. The dog watched her every move, its breathing shallow and rapid. It was clearly terrified but also curious. "Maybe it belonged to one of the original staff," Riley suggested, his voice softer now. "They got sealed in, the dog survived when they didn't." He shook his head. "Poor bastard." Lena held out a gloved hand, palm up. The dog flinched, then its nose twitched. It took a hesitant, shaky step forward, then another. It sniffed her glove, its body still trembling. Then, with a soft whine, it licked her fingers. A sudden, sharp bark from the corridor startled them. It wasn't the Leka. It was deeper, more aggressive. Followed by Thorne's sharp exclamation, "Hostiles, corridor." Lena and Riley were on their feet in an instant, rushing back to the lab entrance. In the main corridor, the rest of the team was engaged, not with pale crawlers. These things were different. They were human, or had once been human. Gaunt, skeletal figures clad in the tattered remnants of lab coats and civilian clothes, their skin gray and drawn tight over their bones, their eyes wide, vacant, and glowing with a faint, hungry luminescence, similar to the fungi on the walls. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like puppets with tangled strings. They carried no weapons, but their long, filth-encrusted fingernails were like claws, and they advanced with a silent, terrifying determination, their mouths stretched into soundless snarls. "The ones who got sealed in," Vance gasped, firing her sidearm. A round struck one of the figures in the chest, staggering it, but it kept coming. They didn't just die, they changed. "Ghouls," Misha roared, his heavy rifle booming, tearing one of the figures apart. "The hunger, it made them this." There were at least half a dozen of them, emerging from the darkened doorways of the other labs, converging on the team. The Leica from the lab behind Lena let out a volley of sharp, agitated barks, then darted past her legs and into the corridor, surprisingly agile despite its emaciated state. It didn't attack the ghoulish figures, but ran towards the far end of the corridor, the direction of Lab Alpha, barking furiously, as if trying to draw the team's attention to something, or away from something. "What the hell is that dog doing?" Carter yelled, fending off a grasping, clawed hand with the butt of his carbine. The ghouls seemed momentarily distracted by the dog's sudden appearance, a few of them turning their vacant, glowing eyes towards it. But most continued their relentless, silent advance on the team. This was a new nightmare. The desperate, starved inhabitants of Sector 4, transformed by decades of isolation and God knows what else into these mindless, ravenous creatures. Sector 4 was not a sanctuary. It was a hunting ground. Chapter 10, Lab Alpha's Secrets. The ghoulish figures, remnants of Sector 4's trapped scientists, pressed their silent, relentless attack. Their glowing eyes and grasping claws made them a terrifying, visceral threat, more disturbing in their twisted humanity than the overtly monstrous pale crawlers. Lena, Riley, and Misha formed a firing line, their weapons barking in the confined space, the muzzle flashes momentarily illuminating the grotesque, attacking forms. Dr. Vance and Thorne provided supporting fire with their sidearms, while Carter, his face a mask of terror, used his carbine more as a club than a firearm, desperately trying to keep the clawing hands at bay. The ghouls made no sound, save for the dry rustle of their tattered clothing and the sickening thud of bullets striking desiccated flesh. They felt little pain, it seemed, continuing to advance even with grievous wounds. The Leica, which had darted towards the end of the corridor, kept barking furiously, its attention fixed on the closed door of what Thorne had identified as Lab Alpha. It would bark, then look back at the fighting humans, then bark at the door again, a clear, desperate attempt to communicate. "That dog knows something," Zara yelled over the din of gunfire, trying to make herself heard. She had taken cover behind an overturned metal cabinet, Riznikov's journal still clutched protectively. "It's trying to lead us somewhere." "We've got to thin these things out first," Lena shouted back, dropping another ghoul as it lunged for Misha. The creatures were slow, but their numbers and silent persistence were unnerving, and they were emerging from more of the darkened side labs, a seemingly endless supply of emaciated horrors. "They're like ants," Riley grunted, slamming a fresh magazine into his rifle. "We kill one, two more take its place." Misha, his heavy rifle proving devastating at close range, was a bulwark, each shot obliterating a ghoul in a spray of dried tissue and bone dust. But even he was being forced back slowly. Suddenly, from the direction of Lab Alpha came a new sound, a loud metallic clang, as if something heavy had fallen inside. The Leica yelped, then began to scratch frantically at the Lab Alpha door, whining. The ghouls hesitated. Several of them turned their glowing, vacant eyes towards the sound from Lab Alpha, their silent snarls momentarily frozen. This brief pause was all Lena needed. "Focus fire. Drive them back," she commanded. Seizing the momentary lull in the ghouls' assault, the team unleashed a concentrated volley. Several more of the creatures fell, and the remaining ones, seemingly confused by the sound from Lab Alpha and the renewed ferocity of the team's defense, began to back away, shuffling back into the darkened doorways from which they had emerged. "They're retreating," Carter stammered, his carbine still raised, his knuckles white. "For now," Lena said, breathing heavily. "That sound from Lab Alpha, it spooked them more than our bullets." She looked towards the door at the end of the corridor, where the Leica was now scratching and whining with increased desperation. "What's in there?" Thorne consulted his slate again. Lab Alpha, Reznikov's primary research area within Sector 4. According to his later notes, this is where he conducted his most advanced experiments after the main Chernobog core was sealed off. He was trying to replicate the agent, modify it, control it. "Sounds like a place we should avoid," Riley muttered, reloading. "Or the place we need to understand," Zara countered, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of fear and scholarly intensity. "If Reznikov was working on a way to control the agent." The Leica let out a sharp bark, then looked directly at Lena, its intelligent eyes pleading. Lena made a decision. "Misha, Riley, cover the corridor. Watch for those things to return. Thorne, Carter, Vance, Zara with me. Let's see what's so interesting about Lab Alpha." They advanced cautiously towards the end of the corridor. The door to Lab Alpha was heavy steel, similar to the others, but it bore no external lock or handle. Instead, a small, grimy keypad was set into the wall beside it. "Electronic lock," Carter observed, "probably no power." He reached out to touch it, then recoiled. "Whoa, static discharge. There is power to this, or residual charge at least." The Leica, seeing them approach the door, stopped scratching and sat back on its haunches, watching them intently, its tail giving a single, hopeful thump on the grimy floor. "Any idea of a code, Thorne?" Lena asked. "Reznikov's journal mention anything?" Zara, already flipping through the brittle pages of the journal, shook her head. "No direct codes, but he mentions dates, anniversaries. His wife's birthday was apparently very important to him before he changed." She found a specific passage. "Here, Elena's day. Even in this frozen hell I remember Elena's day. It is a small light." She looked up. Elena was his wife. Her birthday was June 12th. "Worth a try," Carter said. He carefully typed 612 into the keypad. Nothing. He tried 1206. Still nothing. He tried variations including the year they thought Reznikov had been active. The keypad remained stubbornly inert. "Perhaps not just numbers," Jian Li, the cryogenics expert who had been silently observing, spoke up. Many Soviet systems of that era used alphanumeric codes, often based on project names or significant words. She pointed to the keypad. It has letters as well as numbers. Chernobog, Zara suggested. She tried typing it out. The keypad beeped a negative error sound. They tried other words from the journal Anatoly, Elena, Sector 4. Nothing. The Leica whined again, then nudged Lena's hand with its nose, then looked pointedly at the keypad, then at the journal in Zara's hand. It wants something from the journal, Zara said, bewildered. Lena looked at the dog. Its intelligence was undeniable. Is there a specific passage it might be reacting to, Zara? Something Reznikov wrote about Lab Alpha itself, or a password? Zara scanned the pages again. He refers to Lab Alpha as his sanctum, his heart of ice, he wrote. Here I will master the cold dream. Here I will forge the key. Key, Carter muttered. He typed key into the keypad. It beeped negatively. He tried sanctum. Negative. HEARTOFICE. Negative, he sighed in frustration. Forge the key. That sounds more metaphorical than literal. The Leica let out a soft bark, then gently took the corner of the journal in its mouth, tugging Zara closer to the keypad. It then nudged Zara's hand, the one holding the journal, directly against the surface of the keypad, then looked at Lena. It wants the journal itself to touch the keypad, Vance asked, incredulous. That's ridiculous, Thorne scoffed. It's a keypad, not a biometric scanner for ancient books. But Lena was watching the dog. Its earnestness was compelling. Try it, Zara. What have we got to lose? Hesitantly, Zara pressed the flat leather cover of Reznikov's journal against the surface of the grimy keypad. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the keypad flickered. A soft blue light, similar to the glow from the warden's eyes, pulsed beneath its surface. A low hum emanated from the door, and with a soft click, the heavy steel door to Lab Alpha slid open silently, revealing a brightly lit, surprisingly pristine laboratory within. They stared in stunned silence. The Leica gave a happy yelp and darted inside. I don't believe it, Carter breathed. The journal was the key. Bioelectric resonance, Jian Li mused. If the journal contains trace elements of the Chernobog agent from Reznikov's handling, and the keypad was designed to recognize that specific signature, it's theoretically possible. The interior of Lab Alpha was a stark contrast to the decay and devastation of the rest of Sector 4. It was clean, almost sterile. Banks of sophisticated equipment, far more advanced than anything they had seen elsewhere in the bunker, lined the walls, their indicator lights blinking softly. In the center of the lab, on a raised platform, was a large, cylindrical containment unit made of thick, transparent material, within which a faint black mist swirled. Several smaller, similar units stood nearby, some empty, some containing things. And on a large, central console, a single computer monitor was active, displaying complex, shifting equations and what looked like a three-dimensional model of a complex molecular structure. The Leica was standing beside this console, looking up at the screen, then back at them, whining softly. This is Incredible, Thorne said, stepping into the lab, his earlier fear replaced by a rapacious scientific awe. He did it. Reznikov. He was on the verge of something monumental here. Dr. Vance moved towards one of the smaller containment units. Inside, suspended in a clear gel, was a pale crawler, identical to the ones they had fought but inert, seemingly preserved. In another, a grotesque, multi-limbed creature floated, its eyes closed. A custodian prototype. He wasn't just trying to replicate the agent, Vance said, her voice filled with a horrified understanding. He was refining it, trying to create stable, controllable servitor organisms. Zara approached the central console. The screen displayed data streams in Russian. Project Angeli S. Angel of Ice, that's what he called his work in here. She pointed to a section of the screen. Status, active synthesis. Target, neural dampening compound. Objective, control and reversal of Chernobog Stage 3 transformation. A wave of stunned silence hit the team. Neural dampening compound, Lena repeated. Control and reversal, you mean a cure. Before Zara could answer, the main lights in Lab Alpha flickered violently, then went out, plunging them into near darkness, illuminated only by the emergency lighting, the glow from the monitor, and the faint, swirling black mist in the central containment unit. Alarm klaxons, loud and insistent, began to blare throughout Sector 4. Red emergency lights pulsed, casting grotesque, dancing shadows. On the monitor, the active synthesis status changed to critical error, containment failure imminent. The swirling black mist in the central containment unit began to pulse, faster and faster. A dark, malevolent heart beating in the center of the lab. "What's happening?" Carter yelled, his voice cracking with panic. From the corridor outside Lab Alpha came a chorus of new sounds, the skittering of pale crawlers, the silent shuffling of the ghouls, and chillingly, a deep, guttural roar that could only be the warden. They were no longer just pursuing. They were converging on Lab Alpha. Chapter 11, The Devil's Bargain. The sudden darkness, the blaring klaxons, and the pulsing red emergency lights threw Lab Alpha into a scene of chaotic, nightmarish urgency. The swirling black mist in the central containment unit throbbed with an accelerated, menacing rhythm, its faint luminescence growing stronger, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with the pulsing red emergency lights. "Containment failure imminent," Carter shrieked, pointing at the monitor where the dire warning flashed in stark red lettering. "That thing in the tube, it's going to breach." "What is it?" Thorne demanded, his voice tight with a mixture of scientific curiosity and raw fear as he stared at the pulsating black mist. "The Chernobog agent, a concentrated form." Zara, her face illuminated by the frantic flickering of the monitor, quickly scanned the dense data streams. "It's Subject 0 Alpha. Reznikov's attempt to synthesize a tamed version of the Chernobog core, the Angel of Ice he wrote about. It was intended to be the basis for the neural dampening compound, the cure. But something is wrong. The synthesis is unstable." The Leica, which had been calm until the alarm started, now began to bark frantically, running back and forth between the central console and the main door of Lab Alpha, as if urging them to act or to flee. From the corridor outside, the cacophony of monstrous sounds grew louder, closer. The skittering of countless claws, the dry rustle of the ghouls' tattered clothing, and overriding it all, the enraged, guttural roars of the warden. They were no longer just approaching. They were at the door. Heavy, thunderous blows began to rain down on the steel portal of Lab Alpha, each impact shaking the very foundations of the lab. "They're trying to break in," Riley yelled, he and Misha taking up defensive positions near the lab door, their rifles aimed, though they both knew a simple steel door wouldn't hold against the warden's monstrous strength for long. "The compound, the cure," Dr. Vance exclaimed, her eyes fixed on the monitor. "Is the synthesis complete? Can we retrieve it?" Zara frantically scrolled through the data. "It says, synthesis halted, partial yield achieved, auto-extraction protocol initiated." She pointed to a small, shielded receptacle on the side of the main console. A tiny green light beside it was blinking. "There, that must be the extraction port." Thorne lunged for the console, if there's even a chance. The door to Lab Alpha groaned, a deep, metallic screech as the steel began to buckle inwards under the relentless assault from outside. A massive, clawed hand, wreathed in cold, blue fire, punched through the metal near the top, tearing it like paper. The warden's enraged roar was deafening. "We don't have time for this," Lena shouted, her rifle trained on the rapidly failing door. "We need to find another way out. Is there a secondary exit from this lab?" Zara quickly scanned the schematics on Riznikov's monitor. No, Lab Alpha was designed as a sealed environment, only one way in or out through that door. She looked up, her face pale with despair. "We're trapped." The central containment unit, holding the unstable Subject Zero Alpha, began to vibrate violently, its transparent walls cracking. The black mist within swirled with furious speed, and small, dark tendrils began to lash out from its core, striking the inside of the cylinder like angry whips. "It's going to blow," Jian Li screamed, backing away from the pulsating container, her usual composure shattered. "The sample," Thorne roared, fumbling with the extraction port. He managed to pry open the small, shielded door. Inside, nestled in a padded compartment, was a single, small, metallic syringe, its contents a clear, faintly glowing liquid. He snatched it up. "I've got it." At that exact moment, with a deafening crash, the main door to Lab Alpha was torn from its hinges, hurled across the room by the warden's monstrous strength. It slammed into a bank of equipment, showering the lab with sparks and debris. The warden stood framed in the ruined doorway, a terrifying apparition of ice, shadow, and fury. His blue eyes blazed with an unholy light. Behind him, the corridor was choked with pale crawlers and the silent, shuffling forms of the ghouls, their glowing eyes fixed on the occupants of the lab. "Nowhere to run." The warden's voice was a glacial rasp, devoid of any trace of the tormented Anatoly Riznikov they had briefly glimpsed. This was pure, predatory Chernobog. Lena opened fire, aiming for the warden's head. Her bullets sparked off his icy hide, seemingly having no effect other than to enrage him further. Riley and Misha joined in, their combined firepower creating a deafening roar, but the warden advanced into the lab, shrugging off their bullets as if they were annoying insects. The pale crawlers and ghouls began to surge in behind him. The Leica, with a courage that belied its emaciated frame, darted forward, barking furiously at the warden's feet, nipping at his heels. The warden swatted at it dismissively with his massive, clawed hand. The dog yelped and tumbled away, but immediately scrambled back to its feet, continuing its harassment. The central containment unit for Subject Zero Alpha let out a high-pitched whine, the cracks in its surface spreading rapidly. The black mist within pulsed one last time, then with an explosive crack, the cylinder shattered, releasing the unstable, synthesized Chernobog agent into the lab. It didn't explode in a conventional sense. Instead, the black mist billowed outwards, expanding with incredible speed, not like smoke, but like a living, amoebic shadow. It flowed across the floor, up the walls, instantly coating everything it touched in a layer of glistening black ice. The temperature in the lab plummeted, the air becoming instantly, painfully frigid. The pale crawlers and ghouls that were surging into the lab recoiled as the black mist touched them, several of them becoming instantly encased in the rapidly forming ice, frozen in mid-stride grotesque statues of horror. Even the warden paused, his blazing blue eyes fixed on the expanding black cloud of Subject Zero Alpha. He let out a guttural roar, a sound that was part fury, part recognition. The black mist roiled, then seemed to coalesce, drawing inwards, forming a smaller, denser, vaguely humanoid shape in the center of the lab. It was slender, almost ethereal, composed entirely of swirling black particles and cold, dark light. 2 points of intense, violet luminescence ignited within its head, eyes that radiated an intelligence far colder, far more alien than even the warden's. This was the Angel of Ice, Reznikov's creation, unstable and now free. It turned its violet eyes towards the warden. The two Chernobog entities, master and flawed creation, faced each other. The warden roared, a challenge. The Angel of Ice responded with a silent, psychic shriek that lanced through Lena's mind, making her cry out and clap her hands to her head. It was a sound of pure, synthesized agony and cold, murderous intent. Then the two monstrous beings attacked each other. The warden lunged, his massive claws swiping at the ethereal form of the angel. The angel flowed around his attack like smoke, then lashed out with tendrils of black ice, striking the warden's already damaged leg, causing him to roar in pain and stumble. The lab became a battleground for monsters. The remaining pale crawlers and ghouls, caught between the two warring Chernobog entities, were either frozen solid by the angel's aura or smashed aside by the warden's flailing limbs. Lena and her team were trapped in the crossfire. The expanding black ice from the angel was creeping across the floor, threatening to engulf them. Chunks of debris rained down as the warden and the angel clashed. "We have to get out of here," Carter screamed, cowering behind the main console. "There's no way out," Zara cried, pointing to the doorway, now completely choked with ice, and the struggling forms of lesser monsters. Thorne, clutching the syringe containing the supposed cure, stared at the two battling behemoths, his face a mask of manic excitement and terror. This is it, the ultimate confrontation, the original versus the refined. We're witnessing. We're witnessing our deaths if we don't move. Lena cut him off, her mind racing. The Leica was barking again, this time at a section of the wall near the shattered central containment unit. It was a blank wall, covered in instruments, but the dog was scratching at it, whining, looking at Lena with desperate urgency. Lena pushed her way towards the dog, avoiding a flying chunk of ice. "What is it, boy? What do you see?" The dog nudged a specific panel on the wall with its nose. It looked like any other access panel for the lab's complex machinery. But as Lena looked closer, she saw faint, almost invisible lines etched around it, suggesting it was a door, a hidden door. "Misha, Riley here," Lena yelled, pointing. "This panel, try to open it." While the warden and the angel of ice tore into each other, their battle shaking the lab to its core, Misha and Riley threw their weight against the panel. It didn't budge. The Leica barked again, then looked at the syringe in Thorne's hand, then back at the panel. "The cure," Zara guessed, her eyes wide. "Does it need the compound to open?" It was a wild, desperate thought, but they had nothing else. "Thorne, the syringe," Lena commanded. Thorne, jolted from his awestruck observation of the monster battle, looked at the syringe, then at the hidden panel. He hesitated. This was his prize, his one chance at fame, at revolutionizing science. "Thorne," Lena's voice was a whip crack. With a snarl of frustration, Thorne lunged towards the panel. There was no obvious receptacle, no injection port. He looked around wildly. The Leica nudged a small, almost invisible seam near the edge of the panel. Thorne pressed the tip of the syringe against the seam. He hesitated for a heartbeat, then depressed the plunger. The clear, glowing liquid disappeared into the infinitesimal crack. For a second, nothing. Then a soft hiss. The panel glowed with a faint, internal blue light, then slid smoothly, silently inwards, revealing a dark, narrow tunnel beyond. "It worked," Carter shrieked. "An escape route." "Go, all of you go," Lena ordered, pushing Zara and Vance towards the opening. The Angel of Ice let out another psychic scream as the warden landed a blow that seemed to make its ethereal form flicker and dim. Black ice exploded outwards, coating half the lab. Carter, Lee, and Thorne scrambled into the tunnel. Misha and Riley laid down, covering fire towards the battling monsters, then began to fall back. Lena was the last one at the entrance to the hidden tunnel. The Leica was beside her, barking encouragement. She looked back. The warden, roaring in fury, had the Angel of Ice grappled, his massive claws tearing at its smoky form. The angel shrieked, lashing out with tendrils of pure cold that were visibly weakening the warden, encasing his limbs in more black ice. It was a battle neither could seemingly win outright, but they would destroy the lab and everyone in it in the process. "Come on, boy," Lena called to the Leica. She turned to enter the tunnel. A searing pain shot through her leg. She cried out, falling to one knee. A tendril of black ice, a stray shot from the battling angel, had whipped out and struck her, instantly encasing her lower leg in a sheath of frigid, burning black crystal. The cold was agonizing, stealing her breath. The Leica barked in alarm, nudging her, trying to get her to move. Riley from inside the tunnel yelled, "Lena, what's wrong?" She couldn't get up. The black ice was spreading up her leg, heavy, immobilizing, the cold biting deep into her flesh, into her bone. This was how it started. This was how the Chernobog agent claimed you. Chapter 12. The Price of Escape. Agony sharp and colder than anything Lena had ever experienced, radiated from her trapped leg. The black ice, a creation of the rogue angel of ice, was not merely frozen water. It felt alive, actively parasitic, its unnatural cold seeping into her very marrow, leaching warmth and strength with terrifying speed. Already the numbness was creeping past her knee, a deadening advance. "Lena!" Riley's voice, tight with alarm, echoed from the narrow, dark opening of the escape tunnel. He appeared at its mouth, his face grim in the pulsating, chaotic light of the lab. "What happened?" "My leg, caught by the angel," Lena gritted out, her breath misting heavily, each word an effort against the crushing cold consuming her limb. She tried to rise, but the weight of the black ice combined with the debilitating pain made it impossible. The ice was visibly creeping higher, like a dark, crystalline tide. The Leica whined, nudging her face, then barking frantically towards Riley, a clear plea for help. Outside the immediate chaos of the battling Chernobog entities, the lab was succumbing to the angel's aura. Black ice coated the walls, the floor, the shattered equipment, its surface glistening with an unnatural, light-devouring sheen. The temperature continued to plummet, making every breath a painful gasp. The Warden and the Angel of Ice were still locked in their titanic, destructive struggle. The Warden, though visibly slowed and hampered by the Angel's freezing attacks, fought with primal fury, his roars shaking the lab. The Angel, ethereal and seemingly less affected by physical blows, countered with blasts of concentrated cold and psychic shrieks that reverberated through Lena's skull, adding to her torment. Riley started to move out of the tunnel towards her, but Misha's large hand clamped onto his shoulder, holding him back. "Nyad, you go out there, you get frozen too, or worse." "We can't just leave her," Riley yelled, struggling against Misha's grip. Lena knew Misha was right. If Riley came out, he'd likely be caught in the crossfire or succumb to the spreading ice. Her mind, reeling from the pain and cold, raced through tactical options. There were none, not for her. "Get the others out," Lena forced the words out, her teeth chattering violently. The black ice had now reached her hip, its tendrils snaking upwards towards her torso. "Seal the tunnel, if you can." "Like hell we are," Riley roared, finally shrugging off Misha's hold and lunging towards her. But before he could reach her, Thorn appeared at the tunnel mouth, his face a mask of desperate, wild-eyed calculation. He still clutched the now empty syringe. "The dog," Thorn yelled, his voice hoarse, pointing at the Leica. "The journal opened the lab, the syringe opened the escape route. The dog, it knows this place, it knows the agent." The Leica, as if understanding, barked sharply, then looked at Lena's rapidly freezing leg, then at Thorn, then back at the empty syringe in Thorn's hand. It whined, a high, keening sound. "What are you saying?" Zara's voice came from deeper within the tunnel. "The dog needs the compound." "No, not the dog," Thorn almost shrieked, his eyes alight with a terrifying, desperate idea. He looked at Lena's trapped leg, then at the battling monsters. "The agent. It responds to patterns, to Riznikov's intent." The syringe wasn't just a key, it was a signal, a command. Riznikov designed that escape route, and he designed a way to use his creations. He scrambled past Riley, out into the freezing chaos of the lab, towards Lena. The black ice was now creeping up her side, the cold constricting her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her vision was starting to blur at the edges. "Thorn, what are you doing?" Riley yelled, trying to grab him. Thorn evaded him, his movements surprisingly agile. He knelt beside Lena, his eyes wild. The cure. It was never meant for humans directly, not in its raw form, not at first. It was a control agent, a way to command the lesser Chernobog strains. He looked at the spreading black ice on Lena's leg. "This ice, it's from the Angel Riznikov's Subject Zero Alpha, a modified strain. It might still respond." He held up the empty syringe. "There might be a residue, enough for a signal." Without waiting for a response, Thorn jabbed the needle of the empty syringe directly into the thickest part of the black ice encasing Lena's thigh. He depressed the plunger, forcing whatever microscopic residue of the cure, the control agent, remained within into the parasitic ice. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. The ice continued its relentless, killing creep. Lena felt consciousness slipping, the cold becoming a seductive, peaceful numbness. Then the black ice around the injection point flickered. A faint blue luminescence, the same color as the warden's eyes, pulsed within its dark, crystalline structure. The creeping advance of the ice slowed, then stopped. Then, miraculously, it began to recede. Not melting, but retracting, drawing back from Lena's flesh as if scalded, leaving behind skin that was terrifyingly pale, almost translucent and seared with an icy burn, but blessedly free. The agonizing pressure lessened. "It's working," Thorn screamed, a triumphant, half-mad sound. "It's working." The Leica barked joyfully, licking Lena's face. The relief was so intense, Lena almost blacked out. Riley and Misha were suddenly there, hauling her to her feet. Her freed leg was numb, unresponsive, but it was free. They half-dragged, half-carried her towards the tunnel entrance. The battle between the Warden and the Angel of Ice reached a new crescendo. The Angel, sensing the shift, the momentary assertion of Riznikov's control signature, even from a distance, let out a piercing psychic shriek and redoubled its attack on the Warden. The Warden roared, swatting at its ethereal form, but he was clearly weakening, more and more of his body becoming encased in the Angel's black ice. As Misha and Riley pulled Lena into the relative safety of the narrow tunnel, she looked back one last time. The Warden, his movements becoming sluggish, his blue eyes dimming, was almost completely encased in the shimmering black ice. He looked directly at Lena, at the tunnel mouth. For a fleeting instant, through the monstrous fury, she saw a flicker of something else in those dying eyes, a glimmer of Anatoly Riznikov, a silent acknowledgement, perhaps even gratitude. Then the Angel of Ice enveloped him completely, and with a final, convulsive shudder, The warden became a grotesque, frozen statue, a monument to his own tragic creation. The angel of ice, now unopposed, its slender, smoky form crackling with violet energy, slowly turned its cold, alien gaze towards the escape tunnel. "Seal it now," Lena gasped, the words tearing at her frozen lungs. Thorn, who had scrambled back into the tunnel after them, was already fumbling with a control panel set into the rock beside the hidden door. It was small, simple, with a single, large lever. "This must be the emergency seal," he yelled, gripping the lever. The angel of ice began to glide towards them, its movement unnervingly silent, its violet eyes promising a cold, empty oblivion. Thorn threw his weight against the lever. With a deep, grinding groan, a massive slab of rock and reinforced steel began to descend from the ceiling, slowly closing off the hidden doorway. The angel was almost upon them. Lena could feel its unnatural cold, see the frost forming on the tunnel walls as it approached. Its violet eyes burned into hers. Faster, faster. With a final, thunderous crash, the stone slab slammed into place, sealing the tunnel, plunging them into absolute darkness. The last thing Lena saw before the door sealed was the ethereal, outstretched tendril of the angel of ice, inches from the closing gap, its violet eyes filled with cold, frustrated malice. Silence, darkness. The only sounds were their own ragged breathing, Lena's pained gasps, and the soft whimpers of the Leica huddled against her. Then Carter's shaky voice, Is it over?" No one answered for a long moment. The sudden absence of the klaxons, the roars, the psychic shrieks, was almost as deafening as the chaos had been. Lena tried to move her injured leg. Pain, searing and intense, shot through her, but it was the pain of thawing flesh, of returning circulation, not the parasitic cold of the Chernobog ice. She was alive. They were all alive, for now. "We're sealed in," Misha said, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. "But at least we're sealed in away from that thing." "The cure," Dr. Vance's voice was filled with awe. "It actually worked. Not as a cure for infection, but as a command protocol. Riznikov was a genius, a mad genius, but a genius nonetheless." Thorn let out a shaky, almost hysterical laugh. "I told you, I knew it, the applications, the control. We still have the data from Lab Alpha's console, Carter, don't we? You were downloading it." Carter, fumbling in the dark, activated a small light on his portable unit. "Yeah, most of it, before the power surge. Project Angel of Ice. The synthesis protocols, Riznikov's notes on the neural dampening compounds, his attempts to control the Chernobog transformation. It's all here." He paused. "What's left of it anyway?" "Then it wasn't all for nothing," Thorn said, his voice regaining some of its old, ambitious fire. "We have something of immense value." Lena, leaning heavily against Riley, her leg throbbing, looked at Thorn in the dim light. His eyes were gleaming with a dangerous light, the same light she had seen in them when he first spoke of harnessing the Chernobog agent. He hadn't learned anything. Or perhaps he'd learned too much. The Leica licked her hand, then nudged its head towards the darkness of the tunnel ahead of them. It whined softly, a clear indication that their journey was not yet over. This hidden passage, Riznikov's final escape route, had saved them. But where did it lead? And what other horrors or desperate hopes lay waiting in the frozen, silent depths of Chernobog? The price of their escape from Lab Alpha had been high. The warden was gone, consumed by his own creation. But the Angel of Ice was still out there, a rogue, powerful Chernobog entity. And they were trapped deep underground in a crumbling Soviet bioweapons facility built on secrets far older and darker than the Cold War. Chapter 13. The Path to the Surface. The darkness in the narrow escape tunnel was absolute, broken only by the weak, flickering beam of Carter's portable unit and the occasional nervous sweep of a flashlight. The air was stale, thick with the smell of dust, damp rock, and a faint, lingering metallic tang, the ghost of the Chernobog agent. Lena, leaning heavily on Riley and Misha, fought against waves of pain from her thawing leg. The icy burn was excruciating, a constant reminder of her brush with the Angel's deadly touch. "This tunnel, where does it lead?" Zara's voice was a strained whisper, echoing in the oppressive silence. The schematics on Riznikov's console, they were incomplete, corrupted. This escape route wasn't clearly marked beyond its entrance from Lab Alpha. The Leica, ever vigilant, whined softly and nudged Lena's hand, then took a few hesitant steps deeper into the tunnel, looking back as if to urge them forward. "Looks like our four-legged friend is the only guide we have now," Riley grunted, shifting Lena's weight. Her leg was a dead weight, throbbing with a fiery agony, but at least the parasitic ice was gone, thanks to Thorne's desperate, inspired gamble. "The data from Lab Alpha," Thorne began, his voice regaining its familiar note of ambitious excitement. "Carter, how much did you manage to download before the system crashed?" Carter hunched over his portable unit, his face illuminated by its sickly green glow, shook his head. "It's fragmented. The power surge corrupted a lot of the transfer. I got most of Riznikov's notes on Project Angel of Ice, the synthesis attempts, his theories on controlling the Chernobog transformation. But the core data on the neural dampening compound, the actual formula for the cure, it's heavily corrupted, unusable as far as I can tell." A frustrated sigh escaped Thorne. "Damn it, so close." He glanced at Lena's injured leg. "But the principle, the command protocol, that worked. Even a residue, imagine with a full, stable dose." His eyes gleamed with that dangerous, fervent light again. Lena ignored him. Her focus was on survival, on getting her team, what was left of it, out of this frozen hell. "The dog is moving. We follow it. Misha, take point with him. Riley, you're with me. Carter, Thorne, stay between us. Vance Lee, bring up the rear and keep an eye on our six. We don't know if anything else uses these back tunnels." They moved slowly, painfully, deeper into the uncharted passage. The tunnel was rough-hewn, clearly older than the main bunker construction, reinforcing Misha's theory that Chernobog had been built around, or into, a pre-existing subterranean complex. The walls were slick with moisture, and the air was cold, but it lacked the unnatural, parasitic chill of the Chernobog-infested areas. It was just ancient, terrestrial cold. The Leica led them with an unerring sense of direction, navigating twists and turns. occasionally stopping to sniff the air at intersecting passages, most of which were caved in or too small for humans to traverse, before choosing a path. It was clear the dog had used these tunnels before, perhaps for its entire, lonely existence within the sealed Sector 4. After what felt like hours of slow, torturous progress, the tunnel began to slope upwards. A faint draft of fresher air, carrying the scent of pine and snow, reached them. Hope, a fragile, almost forgotten emotion, flickered within Lena. "Do you feel that?" Carter whispered. "Air, fresh air." The Leica, sensing their renewed hope, barked softly and quickened its pace. The tunnel opened into a small, natural cave, its roof lost in darkness above. And there, on the far side of the cave, was a faint, pale light. Not the flickering emergency lights of the bunker, nor the ghostly green of the fungi. This was the diffuse gray light of a heavily overcast day, filtering down from above. "Surface," Misha breathed, his voice filled with an almost childlike wonder. "It must be a ventilation shaft or a sinkhole." They hurried towards the light, Lena gritting her teeth against the pain in her leg with every jolting step. The Leica scrambled ahead, disappearing up a steep, debris-strewn slope towards the opening. The opening was a narrow fissure in the rock, partially obscured by fallen boulders and snow. It was a tight squeeze, but one by one they managed to wriggle through, emerging onto a windswept, snow-covered mountainside. They were out of the suffocating darkness, out of the recycled air and the stench of decay, out of the immediate reach of the Chernobog horrors. The vast, gray Siberian sky, heavy with impending snow, had never looked so beautiful. The cold here was biting, fierce, but it was a clean, natural cold, a welcome contrast to the parasitic chill of the bunker. They stood on a narrow ledge, overlooking a steep, snow-filled valley. The entrance to the fissure they had just exited was almost invisible, easily mistaken for a natural rock formation. Reznikov had chosen his escape route well. The Leica was already rolling in the fresh snow, yelping with pure, unadulterated joy. Carter sank to his knees, his shoulders shaking. "We made it. Oh God, we actually made it." Zara leaned against a rock, her face pale but relieved. Reznikov's journal still held tight. Dr. Vance and Jayan Lee scanned the surroundings, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and cautious optimism. Thorne, however, was already looking back at the inconspicuous fissure. Incredible, a natural exit. Reznikov must have found this and incorporated it into his escape plan for Lab Alpha. He turned to Carter. "The data. We need to protect that data. It's our only proof, our only leverage." Lena ignored him. She was focused on their immediate survival. "Riley, Misha, scout the immediate area. Find a defensible position, somewhere we can rest, tend to injuries. We need to assess our supplies, figure out our next move." Her leg was screaming, but the fresh, cold air was invigorating. As Riley and Misha moved off, Lena sank down onto a snow-covered rock, carefully cradling her injured leg. The Leica, its exuberant snow bath finished, trotted over and licked her hand, then lay down at her feet, its intelligent eyes watchful. She absently stroked its matted fur. This dog, this silent, loyal creature, had saved them multiple times. Dr. Vance came over and knelt beside Lena, carefully examining her leg. The skin was an angry red, blistered in places from the ice burn, but the flesh was slowly regaining some color. "It's a severe cryoburn," Vance said, her voice grim. "But no signs of the Chernobog agent's direct infection, thank God. Thorne's gamble with that control agent seems to have neutralized its parasitic properties, at least locally." She began to clean the wound with antiseptic from her medkit. Lena winced but bore the pain stoically. "We need to get to the extraction point," Thorne said, packing restlessly. "The helicopter rendezvous it was scheduled for. What, 3 days from our initial insertion? We're behind schedule." "Assuming the pilot even stuck to the schedule after our comms went down," Carter muttered, pulling out his damaged satellite phone. He fiddled with it, then shook his head. "Still dead. That thing, the Angel or whatever, its energy field must have fried it for good." So no easy evac. They were on their own in the middle of the Siberian wilderness, miles from civilization, with winter closing in. And who knew what other horrors the bunker might disgorge, or if the Angel of Ice could somehow find its way to the surface. Riley and Misha returned. "There's a small ice cave system about half a click down the slope," Riley reported. "Sheltered from the wind, defensible. Looks like it's been used by animals. We can make a temporary camp there." "Good," Lena said. "Let's move." The trek to the ice cave was arduous, especially for Lena. But the hope of survival, however slim, spurred them on. The Leica, now officially named Anatoly by a vote of quiet consensus, a tribute to the man whose journal and hidden dog had led them this far, scouted ahead, its presence a small comfort in the vast, intimidating landscape. The ice cave was small, but it offered shelter from the biting wind. They built a small, smoky fire using scavenged deadwood and some of Carter's emergency chemical starters. The warmth was a blessing. As night fell, a heavy snow began to fall, blanketing the mountainside, further isolating them. They huddled around the fire, a small band of exhausted, traumatized survivors, each lost in their own thoughts. Thorne was still obsessed with the fragmented data from Lab Alpha. "If we can reconstruct Riznikov's formula for the neural dampener, even a partial success could change everything. Control, not just of the Chernobog agent, but of cellular regeneration, extremophile adaptation." Zara, holding Riznikov's journal, looked into the fire. He paid a terrible price for that knowledge, his Angel of Ice. It was a perversion of his initial dream. He wanted to heal, to understand. The Chernobog agent twisted that just as it twisted him. Lena watched them, her injured leg propped up, throbbing dully. They had survived Chernobog for now. But the bunker was still out there, a festering wound in the earth, its secrets still potent, its horrors perhaps not entirely contained. And Thorne, with his dangerous ambition, now held a fragment of that terrible power. The Chernobog entity in its various forms had spoken of the other, the core intelligence, sleeping in the black ice. What if it truly awakened? What if Reznikov's Angel of Ice, now free and unopposed within the bunker, found a way to the surface? Their escape was not an ending. Lena knew, with a cold certainty that had nothing to do with the Siberian winter, that it was merely a pause. The hunger of the ice was patient, and the world beyond this frozen wasteland was blissfully, terrifyingly unaware of the nightmare sleeping beneath the permafrost. The Leica, Anatoly, rested his head on Lena's good knee, his warm breath misting in the cold air. He looked up at her with those intelligent, knowing eyes, as if to say, "It's not over." She knew he was right. Chapter 14. The Lingering Chill. Days bled into a grueling routine of survival. The heavy snowfall that had begun on their first night out of the bunker continued relentlessly, transforming the landscape into a treacherous white desert, erasing familiar landmarks and making travel exceptionally difficult. Their meager supplies dwindled at an alarming rate. Lena's leg, though slowly healing thanks to Dr. Vance's diligent care, remained a painful impediment, forcing them to a slow, arduous pace. They trekked south, towards the prearranged emergency extraction point, a journey that should have taken a day or two but was now stretching into an agonizing week. Anatoly the Leica proved invaluable, his instincts guiding them through blinding whiteouts, his keen senses alerting them to the presence of scarce game, a few snow hares, a ptarmigan which Misha, with his hunter's skill, managed to secure, supplementing their dwindling rations. Thorne, despite the harsh conditions, remained fixated on the fragmented data from Lab Alpha. He spent hours huddled over Carter's portable unit, its battery life carefully managed, trying to piece together Riznikov's formulas, muttering about potential applications and unprecedented breakthroughs. His ambition seemed to burn brighter in the face of adversity, a dangerous, almost fanatical gleam in his eyes. Lena watched him with a growing sense of unease. The man had seen horrors that would break most people, yet he seemed to view Chernobog not as a cataclysm to be contained, but as an opportunity to be exploited. Zara, quieter now, spent much of her time rereading Riznikov's journal, her expression a mixture of sorrow and a dawning, fearful understanding. "He knew," she said one evening as they huddled around a sputtering fire in a makeshift snow cave. Towards the very end, before he became the warden, Anatoly Riznikov understood the true nature of the Chernobog agent. It wasn't just a biological entity or a psionic force. He called it a consuming void, a sentient entropy. It didn't just want to transform or control. It wanted to unmake, to reduce everything to a state of perfect, frozen stillness. "A consuming void," Dr. Vance echoed, her voice hushed. "That aligns with some of the more esoteric theories about extremophile sentience, life that evolves not towards complexity but towards a perfect, stable, unchanging state, the ultimate cold." The thought sent a fresh chill through Lena, one that had nothing to do with the Siberian wind howling outside their shelter. The angel of ice, Riznikov's flawed creation, was still free within the bunker. What if it, too, shared that ultimate, terrible goal? Their journey was marked by a pervasive, gnawing anxiety. Every gust of wind seemed to carry a whisper of the bunker's horrors. Every shadow seemed to hide a skittering pale crawler. They knew, rationally, that they were miles away, that the bunker was sealed, at least for now. But the psychological scars of Chernobog ran deep. One evening, as they made camp in the lee of a frozen waterfall, Misha Volkov, who had grown increasingly withdrawn since their escape, finally spoke. "My grandfather," He was a geologist, too. He surveyed these mountains in the 1930s, long before the bunker was built. He told stories, old Evenki legends, about a sleeping cold god under the permafrost, a place where the earth itself was sick, where the silence ate your thoughts. They called it Uku Cherny Layad, the breath of black ice. He looked at them, his eyes dark with a fatalistic certainty. They knew, the old ones knew, and Reznikov's people, they just dug it up. His words hung heavy in the frigid air. The Chernobog facility wasn't just a Soviet bioweapons lab gone wrong. It was a desecration of something ancient, something primal, a wound deliberately gouged into the earth, unleashing a darkness that had slept for millennia. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of struggle, they reached the emergency extraction point, a desolate, windswept plateau marked only by a ruined weather station. There was no sign of a helicopter, no sign of rescue, just the endless, howling wind and the biting cold. Despair, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm them. Carter slumped against the ruined wall of the weather station, his head in his hands. Riley swore, a long, bitter stream of curses snatched away by the wind. But Anatoly the Leica, who had been sniffing the air restlessly, suddenly began to bark, a series of sharp, excited yelps, looking towards the northern sky. Faintly, almost imperceptibly at first, they heard it, the distant, rhythmic thrum of helicopter rotors. Hope, so cruelly extinguished, surged back with a force that was almost painful. They scrambled to their feet, waving, shouting, firing a precious flare that painted a brief, lurid streak against the gray, indifferent sky. The helicopter, a rugged, unmarked Mi-17, circled once, then began its descent, its rotors whipping the snow into a frenzy. The side door slid open and two figures, clad in unmarked, dark tactical gear, their faces obscured by balaclavas and goggles, gestured them aboard. They were not Russian military. They were not any official rescue team Lena recognized. As they scrambled into the helicopter, the last one aboard being Thorne, who clutched Carter's data unit containing the Chernobog files like a holy relic, one of the balaclava-clad figures looked directly at Lena. His eyes, visible through the goggles, were cold, assessing. All accounted for. His voice was unaccented English, filtered through a comm system. "Yes," Lena replied, her own voice hoarse. "Who are you?" The figure didn't answer. He simply nodded to the pilot, and the helicopter lifted off, leaving the desolate plateau and the unseen, slumbering horror of Chernobog behind. They flew for hours in silence, the armed, anonymous figures watching them with unnerving stillness. Lena's mind raced. Who were these people? How did they know where to find them? Were they rescuers or captors? Finally, they landed at a small, unmarked airfield, deep in what looked like a remote, forested region. A black, windowless van was waiting. They were bundled inside, still in silence, and driven for another hour, until they reached a nondescript, modern building, surrounded by a high fence topped with razor wire. It looked like a private research facility, or a prison. Inside, they were separated, led to individual debriefing rooms. Clean, sterile, anonymous. Lena faced a panel of 3 individuals. 2 men, 1 woman, all in severe, dark business suits. Their faces were impassive, their eyes cold and intelligent. The man who seemed to be in charge, older, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing, introduced himself only as Mr. Sterling. "Ms. Petrova," Sterling began, his voice smooth, cultured, "you and your team have been through a significant ordeal. We appreciate your cooperation." The debriefing was long, exhaustive. Lena recounted their journey, the horrors of the bunker, the discovery of Riznikov's journal, the battle with the warden and the Angel of Ice, their escape. She omitted nothing, except perhaps the depth of her own lingering dread. Sterling and his team listened impassively, taking copious notes, their expressions betraying nothing. When she was finished, Sterling leaned back in his chair. "Anatoly Riznikov's work, Project Angel of Ice, the data your technician recovered. It is of considerable interest to certain parties." "What parties?" Lena asked, her voice flat. Sterling smiled, a thin, cold approximation of warmth. "Parties who understand the potential applications. Parties who believe that such power properly controlled could be beneficial." Lena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bunker's ice. Thorne's ambition, magnified on a global scale. "You mean as a weapon," she stated, not a question. Sterling's smile didn't waver. "All power can be weaponized, Ms. Petrova, or it can be a shield. Imagine a biological agent that can be controlled, commanded, an army of guardians impervious to conventional harm, or a compound that can induce targeted cellular regeneration, a cure for unimaginable ailments." He paused. "The Chernobog entity itself, the consuming void you speak of, is a threat, certainly, one that must be managed, studied, perhaps even contained permanently." "You can't contain it," Lena said, her voice low, intense. "You don't understand what it is. It's not just a bioweapon, it's an ending." Sterling steepled his fingers. "We believe we have a greater understanding than you might surmise, Ms. Petrova, and we have resources. Your team. You will be well compensated for your silence, of course, and for any further assistance you might provide. Dr. Thorne has already proven most cooperative." Of course he had. Lena felt a surge of cold fury, quickly suppressed. She was a soldier, a survivor. She knew when a battle was lost, for now. The surviving members of the Chernobog expedition were eventually released, with new identities, substantial bank accounts, and stern warnings about confidentiality. They scattered, trying to disappear, to forget. Carter, haunted by the things he had seen, reportedly descended into paranoia and isolation. Zara al-Jamil vanished, perhaps seeking solace in ancient texts, trying to find other accounts of consuming voids and sleeping cold gods. Dr. Vance and Jian Lee accepted research positions at obscure, well-funded institutions, likely connected to Sterling's organization. Misha Volkov returned to the Siberian wilderness, seeking the solitude of the taiga, perhaps to listen for the whispers of Ukku Cherny Lyad. Riley, ever the soldier, disappeared into the shadowy world of private military contracting. Lena Petrova found a remote cabin in the Alaskan wilderness, not far from where the mountains met the frozen sea. She took Anatoly the Leica with her. They lived quietly, watchfully. She trained, she hunted, she waited. because she knew with a certainty that settled in her bones like the permafrost itself, that Sterling and his shadowy organization would not leave the power of Chernobog untapped. They would try to control it, to weaponize it, to understand it. And in doing so, they would inevitably risk awakening the other, the true consuming void that slept beneath the ice. Some nights when the aurora blazed across the frozen sky, painting the snow in ethereal hues of green and violet, Lena would look towards the distant, unseen north, towards Siberia, towards the scar on the world that was the Chernobog facility. And she would feel a faint, lingering chill, a psychic echo of the black ice, a reminder of the hunger that waited. The journal of Anatoly Riznikov, detailing his descent into madness and the price of his ambition, had been confiscated by Sterling's people. But Lena remembered its words. She remembered the warning. And she knew that one day the silence of the ice would be broken again, and the world would need more than just soldiers. It would need survivors who understood the true nature of the enemy. Anatoly the Leka would often lift his head, his intelligent eyes fixed on some distant point, and let out a low, mournful howl, a sound that seemed to echo the ancient sorrow of the weeping oracles and the eternal, patient hunger of the ice. The nightmare of Chernobog was not over. It was merely dormant, waiting. The end.